If your GPS leads you to a place that doesn't exist on any map, that's not a glitch. That's an order. Before you scroll past this video or assume it's just another late-night horror reel, I want you to hear one thing. Every story you're about to witness is backed by real evidence: dashcam footage, police reports, CB radio recordings, even classified dispatch logs. These aren't ghost stories. These are true horror encounters from America's long-haul truckers, the people who drive straight through the night across the darkest stretches of highway in the country, and sometimes vanish without a trace. They've seen things most of us will never understand. Phantom convoys, government roadblocks that appear and disappear, abandoned towns that still have power, and passengers who never existed in the first place. And when these stories began stacking up, when patterns started forming, GPS loops, clock resets, the same frequency spike at 3:14 a.m., we realized this wasn't random. This was coordination. What you're about to see isn't fiction. It's a pattern of supernatural events connected by a black-budget operation known as Project Night Road, a covert program buried so deep in the federal system that even satellite data has been redacted. This project doesn't use people as test subjects. It uses the roads themselves, manipulating travel routes, bending perception, and rewriting memory through frequencies, signage, and environmental cues no civilian was ever meant to notice. Until now. Verified Fears is not a ghost story channel. It's a classified case archive of verified paranormal events pieced together from survivors, whistleblowers, and data leaks that were never supposed to surface. Each of the 11 truckers you're about to meet came back with a story. Some of them never came back at all. And one of them, Sarah Mitchell, uncovered everything. So if you're driving right now, and your next stop shows up as Exit 0 with a green glowing sign you've never seen before, don't pull over. Don't slow down. And whatever you do, don't let anyone flag you down on the shoulder. Because once you leave the map, you leave reality. Chapter 1. Ray Alvarez. The Haunted Convoy on I-80. Every trucker knows to stay alert at night. But some highways don't just test your reflexes. They test your reality. Ray Alvarez had been driving cross-country for nearly 20 years. And if there was one stretch of road that always gave him the creeps, it was I-80 through Wyoming. A long, frozen artery of blacktop that seemed to eat light, silence radios and stretch time in ways that didn't quite feel natural. Most drivers pass through at night with the radio off, eyes forward, and fingers tight on the wheel. But Ray was different, ex-military, no nonsense, and never one to buy into ghost stories or truck stop rumors. That was until the week he started seeing headlights behind him that never seemed to get closer or farther. Just a steady pair of white orbs hovering at a fixed distance no matter how fast or slow he drove. At first he chalked it up to fatigue, snow glare, or maybe another driver pacing him. But on the third night, when the same lights appeared at the exact same mile marker at the exact same time, and then vanished into pure blackness without ever passing or turning off, Ray knew this wasn't a mistake. Something was following him. Something that didn't obey the rules of the road. And when he started scanning old dashcam footage and cross-referencing log times, he found entries that shouldn't have been possible, overlapping timestamps, duplicated location markers, even trip data from cities he hadn't driven through. It was like his truck was running a second route, a shadow route, without him ever leaving the cab. And deep down, a part of Ray already knew the convoy wasn't behind him anymore. It was around him. Ray's first real moment of doubt came 3 nights into his route somewhere between Rawlins and Laramie, when the weather had dipped to 18 degrees and the snow started spitting sideways. He was alone, no lights behind him, no trucks ahead, just the hum of his rig and the endless white tunnel stretching forward. Then came the flicker. His dashboard clock reset itself, just blinked once, 3:14 a.m., and kept ticking like nothing happened. At first he didn't think much of it, but when he glanced at his GPS, it had quietly rerouted him to the exact same mile marker he'd passed an hour earlier. And the kicker, his odometer hadn't changed. Same reading to the 10th of a mile. "That's not possible," he muttered, tapping the screen. Just then, his CB radio cracked to life, with a voice that wasn't meant to be there. Flat, mechanical, like an automated dispatcher. It said, "Convoy entry confirmed. Unit NR301 active." The voice wasn't on any known channel, and the transmission repeated once before cutting to static. Ray slammed the brakes and pulled over, stepping out into the icy dark. No convoy, no taillights, just a sound, the low rumble of engines in the distance, layered and slow like a fleet idling somewhere behind a wall he couldn't see. That was the moment he stopped thinking in terms of coincidence. From that point on, every instrument reading every radio signal and every mile of asphalt beneath his wheels felt like it could be fake, like the road itself was lying. And someone was staging it. Piece by piece. Ray's first real fracture in reality didn't come with a scream or a shadow figure in his rear view. It came with a quiet blink on the dashboard, something so subtle it could have been ignored if it hadn't happened again. And again. On the third night of his haul through I-80 Wyoming, just after 3:14 a.m., his dash clock froze for exactly 4 seconds, then restarted, then changed the date to the day before. He rubbed his eyes, thinking maybe the cold was messing with the electronics. It was 18 degrees outside, snow cutting sideways in the wind like razors, and his truck was the only thing moving for miles. But when he checked his GPS, that's when his stomach dropped. The route had reset itself, backtracking his position to a mile marker he had already passed nearly 45 minutes ago. Worse, the odometer hadn't moved. Same distance logged, same time block, like that entire stretch of highway had never happened. That's when he noticed the headlights not in the mirror, but flaring briefly on the horizon behind him before fading out. He'd been alone on the road for hours. No one in front, no one behind. And these lights didn't follow the pattern of any regular vehicle. They didn't bounce with terrain, didn't sway, didn't grow larger. They just stayed there, frozen at a distance, hovering. Ray slowed down to let them catch up. They didn't. He sped up. They stayed the same. He pulled over entirely. And they vanished. When he got back on the road, they came back. Like they weren't following him, they were bound to him. Then the CB radio clicked on. Not static, not chatter. Just a single mechanical voice, flat and emotionless, cutting through the white noise. Convoy entry confirmed. Unit NR301 active. Maintain lane compliance. Ray nearly dropped his coffee. That voice wasn't any dispatcher. No one he knew in the fleet ever used code like that. He checked the channel. Nothing active. Dead air. He switched bands 19, 13, 14, even the restricted ones. Nothing. Like that voice had bypassed the radio entirely, tunneled in from somewhere else. And then it repeated like a glitch. Convoy entry confirmed. Unit NR301 active. Maintain lane compliance. Then silence. Just the wind. It didn't make sense. There was no convoy. He wasn't part of any unit. And NR301 wasn't any call sign he'd ever heard in 2 decades on the road. Ray checked his route log. And that's when the real horror kicked in. His ELD. The digital logbook tied to federal transport regulations showed entries he didn't recognize. Trips through Nebraska, Missouri, even Arizona. Routes he hadn't driven in months. Time-stamped, logged, verified with his truck's VIN. And yet he remembered none of it. Some entries even showed overlapping locations, him being in 2 places at once. He pulled over again and scanned his dashcam footage. The last 3 hours had looped. The same semi passed him twice. The same flattened raccoon on the side of the road. The same glint of chrome from a busted guardrail. Frame by frame, identical down to the snowflakes. It wasn't déjà vu. It was replication. Like something was feeding him a pre-recorded version of the road. Ray started talking aloud, partly to himself, partly out of panic. What the hell is this? Who's screwing with me? He tried calling dispatch. The line didn't ring. It just went straight to static. For 5 straight tries. On the 6th, he got a dial tone but no voice on the other end. Just breathing. Then a whisper. 1 word. Drive. That's when he noticed something impossible. His fuel hadn't dropped. After driving for almost 4 hours uphill in wind and ice, his tank still read exactly where it had been when he left the last way station. And his phone, which had dropped to 11% an hour ago, now showed 82%. He wasn't just stuck in a loop. He was in a manipulated environment, like the truck itself was being sustained by something outside the normal grid. Something controlling what stayed real and what didn't. At this point, Ray stopped thinking about fatigue or hallucinations. This wasn't exhaustion. This wasn't weather. This was something embedded inside the infrastructure. An artificial layer built over the real world, triggered only when a driver hit a specific sequence, the right time, the right road, the right frequency. And now, without even meaning to, he'd been pulled into a system that didn't leave digital fingerprints, but did leave something else, a feeling. A tension in the air. The way your ears ring when there's no sound. The way your skin prickles when you're being watched. He looked out the window again. The headlights were back. Only this time they weren't behind him. They were lined up next to him. Silent, lightless trucks on both sides of the highway, moving in perfect formation. And none of them had drivers. Ray had always trusted his rig more than most people. 20 years behind the wheel, and he knew every hum, every squeak, every shift in torque like a heartbeat. But that night the machine turned on him. It began with the speedometer freezing at 62 mph, even as the RPMs climbed and he pushed past the next incline. The road outside was now empty desert, even though he'd been driving through snow-covered Wyoming less than an hour before. The exit signs were blank. Just green rectangles with no text. He passed 3 of them in a row, and the mileage marker stayed stuck on 211. The landscape had become a loop, low hills, dead trees, and the same rusted billboard with peeling red letters, "You are being watched." At first he thought it was a prank, some strange vandalism. But when it showed up again 10 minutes later in the exact same condition, Ray's stomach dropped. He pulled over for the 3rd time, this time leaving the engine running. The air outside wasn't freezing anymore, it was warm, mid-60s, bone dry. That didn't make sense. He checked the outside thermometer on the dash, 66 degrees. He was wearing a thermal jacket and gloves from a snowstorm 45 minutes ago, but his skin was now sweating like he was in New Mexico in late spring. That's when his truck powered down. No warning, no sputter. Just full systems, blackout engine lights, CB radio, GPS, dead silence. The dashboard flickered once and displayed something he'd never seen before, a red screen with a blinking white triangle and 3 words beneath it. Maintain containment protocol. He pulled out his phone, but it wouldn't unlock. It wasn't asking for a PIN or Face ID. It showed input access key NR301, like it had been enrolled in a system he'd never authorized. The screen turned white, then glitched into black with a phrase that made his blood run cold. "You are not authorized to exit this route." That's when the trucks came back. Dozens of them. Silent. No engines, no headlights, just shapes moving like shadows down the interstate. Some were semis like his others, looked military, armored, matte black, windowless. All of them had one thing in common: they didn't have drivers. Through the dim ambient light, he could make out dark windshields with no one behind the wheel. They moved in sync as if tethered to the same invisible signal. He ran. Full sprint into the gravel off the shoulder, but his boots hit something solid that shouldn't have been there. Flat terrain turned into smooth metallic surface like he'd stepped onto a buried platform. He dropped to his knees, slapped the ground, and felt heat radiating through it. There were seams, rectangular outlines the size of cargo containers beneath the topsoil. His truck hadn't just stopped. It had parked itself on something alive. That's when the CB radio clicked back on without power. Static then, that same robotic voice, driver Ray Alvarez. "Your observation cycle is complete. Remain seated." He sprinted back to the cab, but the door was locked from the inside. Not jammed, locked electronically, as if the truck no longer recognized him as authorized personnel. His headlights suddenly burst on blinding white, scanning the area. Then, he saw himself in the driver's seat. Not a reflection, not a hallucination. A figure identical to him, hands on the wheel face, blank, staring straight ahead. He banged on the glass, screamed, kicked the door. Nothing. The figure never turned. It didn't react. Then slowly, the truck began rolling forward, without starting the engine. It moved like it was gliding. Ray chased after it, stumbling across the gravel as the convoy began moving again. 40 or 50 rigs, all heading eastbound, all driverless, all in perfect sync. And his own truck was now part of it. He collapsed on the side of the road, breathless, watching the red taillights disappear into the fog. The silence returned. No wind, no birds, no ambient road noise. He checked his watch. It was still 3:14 a.m. No time had passed. Or maybe too much time had passed and the clock was lying. His entire sense of orientation was gone. And then came the low hum. Not from behind, but from beneath the ground. That was the moment Ray knew this wasn't just a haunted convoy. This was an experiment, and he had just crossed the boundary line. There was no exit, Not anymore. Ray didn't sleep for the next 36 hours. He couldn't. Not after what he saw in that driver's seat. He flagged down a sheriff's deputy near Cheyenne after walking 8 miles on foot through freezing wind and silence so thick it felt artificial. The cop didn't believe a word of it until Ray showed him the dashcam footage. Or tried to, because when they pulled the files, everything was gone. No looping highway, no voice on the CB, no reflection in the seat. Just 3 hours of black screen with the audio replaced by a single repeating phrase, Unit NR301, status integrated. That's when Ray understood this wasn't about ghosts. This was infrastructure-level manipulation. Something embedded in the transport system itself. Something that could reach into a truck's internal systems, alter data, reroute perception, and overwrite memories. He found himself spiraling into forums late at night, places most truckers don't even talk about unless they're 2 drinks deep at a dying bar in North Dakota. Threads about phantom logistics, mirror rigs disappearing mile markers, and drivers who swear they've watched their own trucks pass them on the same stretch of highway, with them still inside. The phrase kept popping up: Project Night Road, a black-budget experiment rumored to have started in the late 90s after the military declassified parts of the GPS satellite network. Officially, it never existed. Unofficially, it was designed to test real-time route distortion and behavioral manipulation using commercial infrastructure as the test bed. Truckers were perfect alone, mobile, predictable, and easily replaced if things went wrong. He traced one of the voice signatures from his CB radio to an FCC-logged frequency reserved for federal use, channel 477 MHz, marked as inactive since 2008. But he picked up a live broadcast, and the voice wasn't just similar. It was his own. Not a recording, not old audio. It was Ray Alvarez speaking in present tense, giving coordinates he didn't recognize, and confirming delivery of something called biometric cargo. That's when everything cracked. Ray realized this wasn't just about a convoy. They had cloned his route, then his voice, then him. The more he searched, the worse it got. DOT records showed 2 trucks registered to his license plate, one active in Wyoming, the other recently sighted in Utah. Credit card logs had gas station charges he didn't make. A traffic cam in Arizona snapped a picture of his face behind the wheel. Yesterday. Except he'd been 800 miles away. The image looked right. Same clothes, same tattoo on the forearm, but the eyes, dead. Like no one was inside. Ray got a burner phone and called an old friend in the military, someone who used to work signals intelligence out of Offutt Air Force Base. The friend didn't even let him finish the story. He just said, "You're in a loop." That's what they do. They trap you in a controlled corridor and run observation passes. Sometimes it's one night, sometimes it's months. They copy your neurodata, test your reaction, then overwrite the evidence and replace the subject. When Ray asked who they were, the call cut off. His phone bricked. No signal, no restart. Just a single phrase blinking on the dead screen: "You saw too much." He went back to where it started, mile marker 211. Nothing unusual, no strange lights, just blacktop and wind. But he walked 30 yards off-road and found it a buried service hatch with federal markings and a keypad. He tried random numbers, then his birthday. It opened. Underground was a maintenance tunnel, bone dry, lit by buzzing fluorescent lights. The air smelled sterile chemical. A single monitor at the end of the hallway played footage of his own truck on loop, dozens of angles, different states, different seasons, but always the same figure driving, always him, always empty-eyed. On the wall next to the screen, a steel plaque bolted into the concrete. No agency name, just a project code: Night Road Transport Node NR301. Continuity protocol active. Ray fell to his knees. Every mile he'd driven, every late-night route through dead towns and broken way stations, it hadn't been real. Or worse, it had been real once and someone rewrote it afterward. He wasn't a witness anymore. He was a variable. Something to be monitored, calibrated, and eventually discarded. The trucks weren't just ghost vehicles. They were containers. For memories. For identities. For test data, in a program so large, so perfectly hidden, that no one would ever believe a word of it. And maybe that was the point. Ray Alvarez hasn't driven a truck in over 2 years. Not since that night on I-80. He sold the rig, moved south, and started working at a small repair shop off Route 12, somewhere no GPS dares to reroute. He doesn't talk to old friends from the road, doesn't keep a CB radio, doesn't use Bluetooth. The first thing he does when someone gives him a new phone, rips out the microphone. But every so often, usually around 3:14 a.m., his devices turn on by themselves. Screens flicker. White noise breaks through the speakers. And for a split second, a phrase appears in red glitching text, NR301, cycle incomplete. Ray keeps a journal now. Not digital. Pen and paper only. The entries are paranoid, looping, repetitive. On some pages, his handwriting changes. Entire sections he doesn't remember writing. Drawings of truck convoys. Maps he swears he's never seen before. One entry stands out, scrawled over 3 pages in frantic pen strokes. If I exist twice, which one is me? The people around him say he's a loner. Quiet. Keeps to himself. But they don't know he's watched his own face walk into the gas station across the highway. Same jacket, same boots, same burn scar on his left wrist. He stayed hidden in the garage, eyes wide, as the other Ray walked out, carrying a bottle of water and a receipt that read, "Thanks for fueling with us again." 11/13/24, mile marker 211. He called a local sheriff once, told him everything, the clones, the voice, the project. But when they ran his name through the system, Ray Alvarez didn't exist. His license was invalid, social security number flagged as retired, birth certificate filed under deceased. According to every record in the state of Wyoming, Ray had died in 2006. But he remembers waking up that morning. He remembers being alive. So then who's living in his name? The deeper he looked, the more erasures he found. Tax forms missing. Military service unconfirmed. Medical files lost in a server fire. It was as if someone had gone through his entire life and filed it under experimental waste. He was a data point. A failed case study. Not just removed from the system, overwritten. Sometimes when he dreams, he's back on the road. Same stretch of blacktop. Same headlights behind him. But this time, he's not in the cab. He's watching himself drive past from the ditch. The truck keeps going. His double never looks back. And in the reflection of the side mirror, there's a third version watching from the trailer. Ray doesn't know what's real anymore. He stopped trying to figure it out. But one thing is constant. Every year on the anniversary of the incident, a manila envelope arrives in his mailbox. No return address, no postmark. Inside, a single printed photo of his old rig parked on a deserted highway, taillights glowing. Written on the back in typed courier font, Unit NR301 standing by. He's tried to burn them. They always come back. He's tried to throw them away. The next envelope just has more pictures of him standing beside the truck, even though he swears he was never there. One even showed him sleeping, mouth open, in his own bed. Ray doesn't want to talk about it anymore. But the fear lingers in his bones, in the way his eyes scan empty parking lots, in the way he flinches when a CB crackles on in a movie, in the way he keeps his mirrors covered just in case they show more than one reflection. There's one thing he'll say quietly to anyone willing to listen. If your truck ever turns right on a stretch of road that doesn't show up on your route, don't fight it. Don't stop. Don't call for help. Just keep driving. Because if they know you've seen behind the curtain, they'll send something worse than a convoy. And to this day, no one knows who's driving the rig marked NR301 eastbound across I-80. But the engine still runs. And sometimes late at night, truckers report seeing a lone figure behind the wheel, eyes wide, hands still on the wheel, with a face they swear they recognize. Theirs. Ray Alvarez never found closure. He never found justice. And he sure as hell never found answers. What he found was silence. A silence so deep, it followed him through every waking hour, like the hum of a machine just beyond hearing. His story is a warning buried beneath reports that never made the news, scrubbed from federal databases, and masked behind words like fatigue and equipment malfunction. But Ray wasn't tired. His truck wasn't broken. Reality was. And what haunts him most isn't what happened. It's the idea that he was never the first. There were others, are others, names never spoken aloud, routes never logged, stories that only exist in fragments half told between static and diesel fumes at midnight truck stops. People like Joanna Reed, Eli Ward, Maria Delgado, each one touched by the same shadow, each one marked by something they never should have seen. Because Project Night Road doesn't just erase people, it rewrites them. So if you're still here listening, maybe you're not just curious. Maybe you've seen things too. A turn that shouldn't have been there. A road sign that blinked when it shouldn't. A voice on the CB that called you by name. And if that happens again, remember Ray's last words before he disappeared. The road isn't what's moving. You are. Chapter 2. Joanna Reed. Lost in the ghost town of Millfield. If you ever drive through a town that's not on your GPS, don't stop. Because if it's not on the map, it's not meant to be found. Joanna Reed had made deliveries through nearly every back road and two-lane stretch between Oregon and New Mexico, but nothing had ever thrown her like Millfield. It was supposed to be a routine haul, 12 pallets of sealed office supplies, headed to a distribution center outside Boise. Her GPS was solid, her logbook was clean, and she was ahead of schedule by nearly 3 hours. That's when the detour came, a flashing construction sign that redirected her off Route 95 and onto a cracked county road she didn't recognize. The trees thickened, the daylight dimmed, and after 10 miles of winding asphalt, her phone lost signal, and the map on her dash began to lag, then freeze completely. When it came back online, the screen displayed just one word in all caps: Millfield. No state, no coordinates, no highway number. Just a blinking dot on an unnamed grid. At first, Joanna figured it was a forgotten township, the kind you pass through in 5 minutes and never think about again. But the silence hit differently here. No birds, no wind, no radio pickup even on scan mode. And then the buildings appeared, storefronts in pristine shape but completely abandoned, like everyone left 5 minutes before she arrived. Lights still flickered behind dusty glass. An overhead fan spun slowly in a diner. And as she rolled deeper into town, one creeping realization took hold: nothing looked old. Everything looked paused. Joanna Reed rolled into Millfield just before dusk, headlights flickering against rows of perfectly preserved buildings, gas stations with 2.89 prices, diners with neon signs still humming, but not a single person in sight. Her first instinct was to call dispatch, maybe check if she'd taken a wrong turn. But her phone showed no service, and when she tried the rig's sat-nav, it reset mid-search, showing only a black screen and a blinking red dot labeled active node. That's when the air changed. Not just the silence, but the pressure, like the town was holding its breath. She drove 3 blocks in before realizing there were no street names, only intersections marked with faded numbers: 3rd, 5th, 7th. Oddly, every block skipped even numbers, as if half the town didn't exist or wasn't meant to. She stopped outside a post office. The flag was up. A mailbag sat on the stoop uncollected. When she stepped down from the cab, her boots didn't echo like they should have. The concrete was too soft, almost padded. The sound was delayed. Joanna walked to the door and pushed gently. It opened without resistance. Inside, the lights buzzed overhead, and the clock on the wall read 3:14, even though her watch said 6:02. There were newspapers stacked neatly on the counter. She picked one up. No date. Just the headline, "We remain to maintain." That's when the voice hit her earpiece dead center in her CB radio band, even though it hadn't picked up a signal since she entered town. Unit 47 acknowledged. Proceed to drop site. She froze. This is independent freight solo contract. Who's calling? She answered. No reply. The voice returned, but not in response. Joanna Reed. Arrival confirmed. She hadn't said her name aloud. She hadn't even checked in. No one should have known she was there. Panicked, she jogged back to her truck, but it was no longer where she'd parked it. It now sat across the street, engine idling, headlights on. She knew she'd left it in park, engine off. The lights weren't even automatic. She stepped into the road, the fan light from the diner casting a spinning halo across the pavement. But the shadows weren't moving right. They bent toward her, not away. Like the light was coming from behind them instead of above. She got in the truck, slammed the door, and tried to reverse. The gear stick moved, but the truck didn't. It wouldn't respond. Then the dashboard lit up with a new display: drive mode observation. She hit the ignition. Nothing. Slammed the brakes. No sound. Tried the horn, it let out a muffled tone like it was buried underwater. That's when she noticed the rearview mirror. She hadn't adjusted it, but it no longer reflected the back window. Instead, it showed the diner across the street. But inverted. Like she was seeing it from the inside, watching herself through the glass. She looked out the actual window. The diner was dark. Dead. But in the mirror, the neon still flickered and a figure sat at the counter. It looked like her. Same ponytail. Same flannel. She watched as the mirror. Joanna turned her head slowly and smiled. She jumped out of the cab and the town changed. Buildings shifted. A storefront that had been a pharmacy was now a laundromat. A clock tower that wasn't there before now loomed above her, ticking loud and slow. The map on her dash updated by itself, showing a closed loop labeled Millfield Corridor active. There was no exit. The roads rerouted her back to the center no matter where she turned. The fuel gauge didn't move. Time didn't pass. The sun stayed frozen just below the horizon, casting eternal twilight across empty sidewalks. She drove in circles for nearly an hour, but every road returned her to the diner. Every loop showed new signs of her own presence: an empty coffee cup she hadn't ordered, a napkin with her name written in someone else's handwriting, a delivery manifest signed with her signature, and the note delivered. Integration pending. Joanna wasn't just lost. She wasn't just being watched. She was being duplicated. And something inside Millfield had been preparing for her arrival long before she ever took that detour. Joanna tried everything. Reverse gear. Manual override. Even kicking the shifter box with steel-toed boots, nothing worked. Her truck sat motionless in the middle of a looping main street that refused to end. Each attempt to escape brought her back to the exact same intersection, a blinking yellow light hanging above a boarded-up general store, where a payphone rang every 15 minutes. She never answered it, but it always stopped ringing the moment she looked at it. The message was clear. They were waiting. By the second hour, her mind began to fracture. Not from fear. Joanna had driven through blizzards, sleep-deprived and borderline hypothermic, but from the predictability of the impossible. She started noticing patterns. The same cat crossing the same alleyway. The same empty soda can rolling across the street, always turning left. The same cloud formation above the diner. It was a loop, but not just physical. Psychological. Controlled. Her truck's clock never left 3:14 p.m. Her phone battery hovered at 82% no matter how long it stayed on. Her logbook reloaded every time she flipped the page, new ink bleeding over old entries, always ending with the phrase "observation integrity preserved." That's when she saw the people. Not many. Just two at first, far down the road, walking in perfect sync, heads tilted at the same unnatural angle. When she shouted, they didn't react. When she stepped toward them, they stepped out of view instantly, as if edited out of the scene. Later, she caught a glimpse of someone inside the laundromat, a silhouette watching her from behind a flickering window. She rushed in. Nothing. Just heat still radiating from a dryer. A smell, her detergent. Her brand. And written on the fogged glass from the inside, "You came back." She collapsed in the middle of Main Street, hyperventilating, heart pounding. For the first time in years, Joanna felt truly deeply unsafe. Not threatened. Erased. This wasn't fear of death. It was fear of removal. Fear of being unwritten. Every mirror in Millfield now showed her reflection, with slight maddening differences. Wrong eye color, wrong earrings, hair parted on the wrong side. Sometimes no reflection at all. Back in the truck, her dash lit up with a new message. Route control override accepted. Then her hands began to move. Not by force, but by reflex, like her body was responding to commands before she processed them. She turned the wheel, shifted into drive, hit the gas. She couldn't stop herself. Something had entered the feedback loop between her brain and her actions. She screamed, gripping the wheel, trying to resist the movement of her own muscles, but her arms obeyed someone else. The truck turned left on 5th Street. She didn't remember deciding that. The headlights flickered, scanning the sidewalk. A figure stepped out. Another Joanna. Blank stare. Grease-streaked flannel. Face pale like wax. The figure raised one hand, then pointed at her. Not a wave. Not a threat. A signal. Then the horn honked on its own. She blacked out. When she came to, her rig was parked outside the town limits. Her fuel was full. Her watch read 6:03 p.m. The sun had moved. Birds were chirping. It looked normal. But when she opened her delivery manifest, the destination had changed. Instead of Boise, it now read Millfield, return scheduled, signed with her own initials, and the bottom of the form bore the mark NR42, Cycle 3 complete. Joanna started driving, fast, away from the town, away from the blinking signs. But every turn felt wrong. Every road sign felt placed. And when she passed a rest stop 30 miles later, the billboard outside made her stomach flip. Now serving drivers. Since 1957, welcome to Millfield. She hadn't escaped. She just switched corridors. Joanna didn't speak for the rest of the drive. Not to dispatch, not to herself. She kept the radio off, eyes locked on the double yellow lines gripping the wheel until her knuckles went white. The highway stretched ahead in a perfect straight line. No turns, no elevation. Just an endless flat corridor under gray skies. It felt like a simulation trying too hard to be real. When she stopped for gas 100 miles outside Millfield, she noticed the strangest thing of all. No one reacted to her presence. The attendant at the register didn't look up when she paid. The couple near the vending machines didn't flinch when she bumped the door. They moved in perfect, disconnected rhythm, like actors rehearsing the same scene for the 100th time. Joanna left without speaking. She checked her phone again. One missed call. No number. Just an audio file titled, "Welcome Back." She hit play. Static. Then her own voice. Not a recording. Live. Present tense. Heading eastbound on 26. Fuel 87%. Cargo secure. Driver stable. Cycle 3 verified. Joanna dropped the phone like it burned. She hadn't said those words. Not today. Not ever. That night she checked into a roadside motel. Room 211. The receptionist never asked her name, just handed her the key without a word. The TV in her room turned on by itself, playing black and white security footage of a town street Millfield, but not from any angle she'd seen. It was elevated, watching from above. From a drone or surveillance rig. The timestamp at the bottom blinked, loop integrity maintained. She unplugged the TV. The screen stayed on. In the motel drawer, instead of a Bible, she found a hardbound manual. No title. Just the seal of a federal agency she didn't recognize, 5 lines forming a broken highway symbol. Inside were pages of codes, acronyms, and route overlays with names that chilled her: Shadow Route Protocol, Behavioral Isolation Grid, NR42, Cognitive Deletion Threshold. Her name was listed. Joanna Reed. Observer Class. Status under integration. At that moment, something inside her snapped. The truth was bigger than Millfield. It wasn't a cursed town. It wasn't a hallucination. It was a controlled anomaly, a designated site inside a massive, long-running federal experiment buried within the U.S. highway system. Something called Project Night Road. The theory was as elegant as it was horrifying. Certain highways weren't built to connect towns. They were built to contain test corridors, pockets of fractured space-time where controlled psychological environments could be looped, erased, or rewritten. Drivers were ideal test subjects, isolated, routine-driven, trackable. The experiment didn't target you. It absorbed you. It replicated your route, simulated your behaviors, and then observed what happened when you realized reality was responding to you. When the mirror didn't match. When time didn't pass. When people acted from a script you hadn't read. And when that happened, the system didn't delete you. It duplicated you. Joanna broke down in the motel bathroom, sobbing into the sink. Her reflection in the mirror didn't move in sync. It blinked a half-second too late. Its hand lagged behind hers. Then it smiled before she did. She stumbled backward, heart racing, and heard a knock at the door. 3 slow taps. Then silence. She checked the peephole. Empty hallway. But tucked under the door was a delivery manifest. Her own signature. Her own truck, VIN. Millfield Return Cycle 4. Authorized. Identity lock, approved. She dropped to her knees. The motel room lights flickered. Her phone buzzed violently. It had no SIM card, but a message appeared on screen. You are not the original. That's when she heard the horn. Outside, her truck. She looked out the window and saw herself behind the wheel, blank-faced, engine idling, waiting. Joanna didn't scream. She didn't run. She just stared as her double reached toward the passenger seat and held up a piece of paper. Even from the second story, she could read the words, "One of us has to go." Joanna Reed stopped driving freight 4 days after Millfield. She didn't tell anyone why. She left her rig in an Arizona depot, keys still in the ignition logbook unsigned. Her dispatch assumed burnout. Her family assumed she needed space. No one asked the questions she feared most. Was she still herself, and if not, who was back home in Spokane? She tried to build a routine. Short walks, groceries, isolation. But every reflective surface haunted her. Her mirror delayed by milliseconds. Her shadow didn't always fall right. Once in a grocery store freezer door, she saw herself blink before she did. She snapped a photo to prove it. But when she checked her phone, the camera roll showed an image she never took, her standing in front of the Millfield post office, staring up at the clock tower. The timestamp read 3:14 p.m. Joanna began receiving mail she hadn't ordered. Logistics magazines addressed to Joanna R2. A birthday card from a cousin who'd passed away 3 years ago. A freight manifest from a company she'd never worked for confirming delivery to a destination she'd never visited. NR42 loop terminated. Observer retained. Memory bleeds 17%. Status functional. She stopped sleeping. She'd wake at 3:14 a.m. sharp, heart racing, mouth dry, convinced she'd heard her truck idling outside. More than once she opened her window and saw it, same model, same faded Horizon Freight decal, just sitting by the curb with no driver. Once she went down, the cab was empty, but on the passenger seat was a photograph of herself sleeping, time-stamped 1 hour earlier. Joanna began documenting everything by hand. Digital tools had become unreliable. Notes vanished. Cloud files glitched. Voice memos played back with a second voice beneath hers, whispering answers to questions she hadn't asked. She filled 5 journals in 6 weeks. All of them ended with the same phrase scrawled in different handwriting: "You are still inside." Then came the sightings. A fellow driver from her past messaged her out of nowhere. "Saw you last week," he wrote. "Passed you on I-84 near Baker City. You didn't wave back. Looked off." Joanna hadn't been to Oregon in months, and the truck he described had her old registration number 1. She had officially retired. He even sent dashcam footage. She watched the video 17 times. It was her. Hair pinned up the way she used to wear it. Same jacket. Eyes flat. Focus straight ahead. No expression. No hesitation. Just motion. Every time she tried to report it, the systems broke down. Phone calls dropped mid-sentence. Emails bounced. The local DMV claimed they had no record of her CDL license. When she checked her federal background file, the page loaded blank, save for a watermark, access revoked. Observer, no longer primary. Joanna no longer felt displaced. She felt disqualified. Like the world had quietly voted her out, and a stand-in had already taken her place. She tried to burn the journals. They wouldn't catch. She ripped them up. The next morning, they were back on her kitchen table, fully intact, except now they included pages she never wrote. Pages describing conversations she hadn't had yet, and locations she hadn't visited, but recognized from dreams. One day she received a package. No return address. Inside, her original delivery manifest to Boise, folded neatly. Only now it had been digitally stamped. NR42 transfer successful. Subject memory inversion pending. Taped to the back was a sticky note, handwritten. "We needed a version of you that wouldn't resist." Joanna now lives off-grid. No phone, no mail, no online records. But truckers still talk. They whisper stories of seeing her on forgotten highways, always alone, always quiet, pulling into ghost towns that don't appear on any map. And in every story she looks the same, like herself, but emptier. Like something behind her eyes had been dimmed, swapped, or shut off completely. And sometimes, just sometimes, those who look in the mirror too long say they see her behind them, reflected in the glass. Watching. Waiting. Wearing the same flannel. The same boots. Standing perfectly still. Because once you've seen behind the curtain, you never really leave the road. Joanna hasn't returned to Millfield. Not physically. but part of her never left. Some nights, she dreams of the town. Only it's rearranged. Different signage. New buildings. Always familiar. Always wrong. She wakes with dust on her boots and engine grease on her hands even though she hasn't touched a truck in months. The mirrors stay covered now. The clock's unplugged. But every 3:14 a.m. something buzzes. A hum in the walls. A light flicker. The distant echo of her own voice reciting words she doesn't remember saying. People who knew her say she changed. More cautious. Slower to speak. Her laugh faded. But the worst part, they've started seeing her in places she hasn't been, in 2 towns at once. At a rest stop in Utah while she's logged in at a co-op in Washington. Photos pop up online of her staring blankly at gas station security cams. Some say it's glitchy facial recognition. Others say it's a twin. But those who've met her eyes in those moments say the same thing that wasn't her. What happened in Millfield wasn't random. It was engineered. Joanna was selected, observed, rewritten. And if you think her story ends here, it doesn't. Because this isn't a ghost story. It's a system test, and we're all still inside it. Next, Eli Ward, The Night Rider, on Channel 19. Chapter 3. Eli Ward, warned by the Night Rider on CB radio. When the voice on Channel 19 knows your name before you key the mic, you're already inside the broadcast. Eli Ward never feared the long haul. Not the graveyard shifts, not the empty stretches through Nebraska, not even the back roads that disappeared from GPS after sundown. He liked the solitude, the quiet, the radio hum that filled the cab like static lullabies. But that changed the night he heard a voice break through his CB on a frequency that hadn't been live in decades. It started like a routine delivery 300 miles across Wyoming with a load of refrigerated goods. No detours, no storms. But somewhere past Rawlins, as the moon slipped behind a low ridge, Eli's CB crackled awake with no input. A calm, low voice cut through the static. "You need to take the next exit, Eli. You're not where you think you are." He hadn't said a word, hadn't even touched the mic. Eli stared at the console. Channel 19. His usual standby was lit, but the display glitched. The digits flashed N1, N3 before returning to normal. He tried to answer, but the mic was dead. Then the voice came again, stronger, closer. "You passed the threshold 6 minutes ago. They've already tagged you. Turn off your GPS, now." The CB cut off. And in the rear view, Eli saw headlights. Not close, not moving. Just watching. He was alone. But somehow, he wasn't the only one tuned in anymore. Eli Ward prided himself on keeping a clear head. After 16 years on the road, nothing rattled him. Not wildfires, not mechanical failures, not even that time he swerved to avoid a deer that turned out to be a tire swing. He didn't believe in ghosts. What he believed in was caffeine routine and the sweet comfort of Channel 19. Trucker's lifeline, unfiltered chatter, warnings about cops, speed traps, black ice. But that night, Channel 19 didn't warn him about a real-world danger. It warned him about the road itself. The voice had said to exit, but there was no exit. Eli knew the stretch of I-80 by heart. The next off-ramp wasn't for another 40 miles. Still, he slowed down. His GPS flashed, recalculating, then froze. The screen dimmed slightly, colors off by a few degrees, just enough to feel wrong. It came back online with an unfamiliar map, one he didn't recognize. It no longer showed I-80. Instead, a thin red line traced a nameless highway labeled Corridor 9R. He squinted. No road in the US had that designation, at least not one made public. Then the voice returned, not through the speakers this time, but from the air vents, a low whisper woven into the fan's hiss. "You're veering, Eli. Stay centered. Watch the mirrors." He shut off the radio, turned the vent down. Nothing helped. The voice had found its way in. His eyes darted to the mirrors. For a moment, everything looked normal. Then he saw his own taillights in the side mirror. But that wasn't possible unless another truck was mimicking his speed just feet behind him. He tapped the brakes. The lights behind him didn't change. He sped up. Still there. He took a photo with his dashcam app and glanced at the playback. There were no lights in the footage, just a black void. Eli's palms started to sweat. His instruments were still reading normal fuel oil engine temp, all fine. But the road began to feel stretched. The yellow lane markers warped at the edges like heat mirage in reverse. They didn't flicker, they pulsed, and every few seconds he swore he passed the same billboard again and again. Stay awake. Stay aligned. Stay obedient. It wasn't a brand, no logo. Just black text on gray metal, unlit in the dark. He passed it 3 more times before he realized he was on a loop. He pulled over, shut down the engine, climbed out, heart pounding. Cold wind. Silence. But the moment he stood on the asphalt, his CB radio crackled to life again despite the truck being off. You broke protocol, Eli. Turn around. He whipped toward the cab. No one inside. The dashboard was dark, and yet the CB glowed faint red. He climbed back in and stared at the interface. The channel had changed. No longer 19. It now displayed channel 9. Rider not a number but a name. He tried to switch it back manually, but every time he twisted the dial, it snapped back. Then the voice again. Calm, unshakable. We're not on the air. We're in the layer. That phrase lodged in his skull like a splinter. The layer. What the hell did that mean? Suddenly the truck restarted on its own. No keys, no ignition sequence. Just a quiet hum, then the dash lights flickering to life. The GPS blinked. A new message scrolled across the screen: observer active. Corridor stabilized. Continue south. He hadn't told it where he was going. Hadn't entered a destination. His hands trembled as he reached to shut it all down, only to see something that made his breath catch. On the screen in the lower corner was a live rear camera feed, and behind his truck stood himself. The truck was no longer his. It drove, but not at his command. It turned without his input, slowed, without him touching the brake. His hands gripped the wheel, but it felt more like holding onto a moving body than steering a vehicle. The CB stayed on voice silent now, but breathing. Eli could swear he heard breath slow, measured, like something was on the line waiting. He pulled out his phone to call for help. No service. He opened his route planner, gone. Every app showed the same frozen error: return to corridor. That was when the road changed. What had been I-80 was now something else. The pavement faded at the edges. The lines no longer formed perfect parallels. The trees along the shoulder grew taller, more gnarled, reaching over the road like claws. The sky dimmed, not from sunset, but as if the atmosphere itself was shutting off. Then came the fog. Thick. Unnatural. It rolled in from both sides but never touched the cab. It sat outside like a wall of observation glass, just far enough to be unnerving. Shapes moved in it, human-sized, always just beyond the reach of his headlights, and the loop began again. Billboard, gas station, cracked overpass. Billboard, gas station, cracked overpass. Each pass the sign said something new. Do not respond to the voice. You are being measured. Stop looking at the mirrors. Eli's breathing turned shallow. His reflection in the side mirror didn't match his own panic. It blinked out of sync. Once it turned its head before he did. That was the moment he realized they weren't watching him through the CB. They were watching from within. He tried to stop the truck, hit the ignition. Nothing. He yanked the wheel, it resisted like thick tar. The more he fought it, the more the GPS repeated a single command scrolling endlessly across the screen. Stay aligned. Stay aligned. Stay aligned. And then for the first time in his life, Eli screamed. Not out of fear. Out of sheer mental rejection, a primal refusal to accept what the road had become. That's when the voice came back. Different this time. Not calm. Not instructive. Eli, we warned you. You're deviating. This is not your corridor. Suddenly the fog closed in solid white against the windows. The truck shuddered violently. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. His breath clouded inside the cab. The outside world disappeared completely. And then, a new sound. A second engine. Not behind him, but beside him, matching his speed. Perfectly. He looked out the passenger window and saw another truck identical to his running parallel through the fog. But the windows were blacked out. No driver visible. until the glass cleared. It was him. But wrong. The figure in the other cab had no expression, eyes hollow, hands resting calmly at 10 and 2. It didn't look at him. It didn't acknowledge him. It replaced him. The CB crackled observer crossover complete. Primary function terminated. Prepare for memory splice. Eli's hands released the wheel on their own. He felt pins and needles crawl from his fingertips to his spine, every nerve misfiring. His vision blurred. For a moment he felt himself duplicate, not split, not die, just copy. And then without transition he was parked on the shoulder of a sunlit highway. No fog, no voice, full bars on his phone. CB silent. Everything normal, except the time, 3:14 p.m. And the only message on the dash, welcome back, Eli. But in the side mirror, the highway behind him was completely empty. No traffic, no horizon, no other truck. Just one figure walking slowly up the road, wearing his jacket. Eli Ward woke up in his truck parked perfectly at a rest stop outside Laramie. Engine off. Keys in the ignition. CB radio silent. Except it wasn't where he remembered stopping. His logbook showed a delivery completed to a warehouse that didn't exist. The stamp said Corridor 9R, verification successful. No company name, no contact. Just an embossed black seal, a broken radio tower with an eye in the center. His GPS history had been wiped, but the most disturbing part, his voice memo app had been recording. For 4 hours straight. He hit play. The voice that came out wasn't his. It sounded like him, but too smooth. No breaths. Too scripted. Corridor traversal successful. Observer remains unaware. Identity sync at 91%. Continue monitoring until residual resistance decays. Begin phase 2. Narration collapse. Eli dropped the phone, backed out of the cab. The world spun. The air didn't feel like Wyoming. It smelled sterile. He ran his hand along the truck's exterior and noticed the logo had changed. It still read Ward Logistics, but the font was wrong. More modern, smoother, like it had been digitally rendered and then projected onto the physical surface. Inside the rest stop, the vending machines were filled with blank packages. No brands, no names. Just barcodes and phrases like Fuel Unit 02 and Hydration Packet. A man sat at a corner booth sipping something from a paper cup. When Eli made eye contact, the man didn't blink. He just nodded and said, "They got your baseline voice now. Don't speak into anything digital again." Before Eli could respond, the man stood and left without a sound. No footsteps, no door chime. That night, Eli tried scanning the CB radio again. Every channel was silent. Until 3:14 a.m. Eli, you're in the ghost band now. It wasn't the same voice as before. This one shook, layered. It echoed like it came from inside an empty cathedral. Channel 19 isn't a frequency, it's a shell. A slot in the signal field where consciousness gets parsed. Every time you used it, they listened, measured, trained their overlays to mimic you. Now they're running you like an audio file looped and edited. He tried to speak but couldn't. His vocal cords refused to activate. The air in the cab went cold, and his reflection in the windshield stared back at him without blinking. "You were a good match," the voice continued. "Predictable routes. Solitary lifestyle. Little outside interference. Perfect for early integration. But you broke pattern. You looked too closely. So now they've activated the failsafe." Eli's head throbbed. His thoughts looped. Names he didn't recognize flooded his mind. Joanna Reed, Victor Shaw, Maria Delgado. None of them people he'd met. But he knew their roots, knew their logs, knew their final check-ins. They had all heard the same voice. Project Night Road isn't a map, the voice said. It's a network, a breathing net of synthetic corridors designed to run in parallel to our world. Trucks, radios, satellite routes, they're all just delivery mechanisms for the experiment. Eli stared at the CB. The frequency had changed again. Now it read, N1 gate, R1D3R, active. And just below that flashing red primary, Eli Ward obsolete, shell ready. The last thing he remembered before blacking out was a sharp feedback tone from the radio, too loud, too pure, like it hit not his ears, but his spine. When he woke again, the truck was moving, and he wasn't in the driver's seat. But he could still see everything, through someone else's eyes, someone wearing his face, speaking with his voice. Eli Ward disappeared from the trucking circuit 6 weeks after the CB incident. His rig was found abandoned on a remote dirt turnout in Montana, keys still in the ignition, headlights off, logbook burned. The only thing intact in the cab was the CB radio, still powered, still tuned to channel 19, though the frequency monitor flashed N1GHT-R1D3R in pale blue digits. No one had spoken to him since his last delivery in Casper. No receipts, no dispatch logs, no trace. And yet drivers began hearing his voice on the road. Not Eli's voice exactly, but something close. Familiar cadence, same dry sarcasm, but hollow, too calm, too rehearsed. Breaker 19. Any units westbound on the loop, slow it down. They're watching pattern drift tonight. Trucker chatter on Reddit forums dubbed it the ghost of Channel 19. Some thought it was an AI glitch, others a prank played by signal hijackers. But a few, those who'd been on the loop routes themselves, recognized something deeper. Something they couldn't explain. They recognized the loneliness in the voice. The first confirmed incident came from a driver out of Oregon. Said he passed a rig on Route 395 just before dawn. Same make and model as Eli's. He flashed his brights in greeting. The truck didn't respond, didn't slow, just coasted perfectly centered in the right lane. But what chilled him most was this: he saw Eli. Not just at the wheel in the passenger seat. Eyes wide open, mouth agape like he was screaming silently. Frozen, watching the road, watching him. The driver turned off his CB for 2 weeks. Eli's family filed a missing person report. Local PD ran the plates, contacted the company. But the official record returned an anomaly. Eli's name had been flagged in an outdated database labeled Observer Class. Status null. It was tied to a non-public government contractor under the code name Project Night Road. The case was quietly closed. And then the dreams started. Truckers from Arkansas to Nevada began reporting the same nightmare, driving a familiar stretch of highway, only to find themselves locked into a loop. No turns, no exits. A voice on the CB urges them to comply. Another version of them appears in the mirror. Their own voice comes out of the radio, whispering logs they haven't lived yet. One driver wrote, "I don't remember getting off the road, but I remember someone else taking the wheel. And they looked like me, but without memory in their eyes." Another, "I keep hearing my own voice when I sleep. Not talking, narrating. Like I'm a podcast for something else." Eli became more than a story. He became a signal. A roaming consciousness no longer tied to his body. Repeated, echoed, spliced into radio space across federal corridors. His thoughts reduced to templates. His identity flattened into a voice model now used to guide, warn, or trap others depending on which corridor protocol is active. Some say that's mercy, others say that's containment. And every few months, new truckers go missing on clean routes, highways with no history, no danger, no record of trouble. Just static on the CB. And then a whisper. "You passed the threshold 6 minutes ago. They've already tagged you." And the most terrifying part, that voice is always someone the driver knows. Or worse, themselves. To this day, Eli Ward's truck has been seen at least 7 times, always in different states, always at dawn or dusk, always running without headlights. If you see it, don't honk, don't wave. And whatever you do, do not answer the voice on Channel 19. It's not asking you a question. It's loading your response. Because once you're heard, you're already part of the next broadcast. Eli Ward was never found, but he was never truly lost either. Out there, somewhere on the edge of reception, his voice still breaks through the static. Not asking for help, not crying out, just narrating, calm, looping, mechanical. Like a man whose memory was stripped and rebuilt into a warning system. Some say you can hear him around 3:14 a.m. when the CB crackles for no reason, and your own name comes through the speaker, spoken in your voice just a shade off. Others report seeing a second version of themselves in rest-stop mirrors just for a blink. Just long enough to wonder who's watching who. And maybe that's the point. Maybe Project Night Road doesn't just erase people. Maybe it copies them, overlays them, waits for the moment they break patterns so the replacement slips in unnoticed. And if you've ever felt like the world's acting off, like the exit came too soon, like the voice on the CB knows what you're thinking, then you're probably already inside the test. They don't want to trap you. They want to study how long you'll pretend it's still real. Next time on Verified Fears, Maria Delgado picks up a stranger on a back road in North Dakota and realizes she's the one who's been flagged for collection. Chapter 4. Maria Delgado, Hitchhiker Trap in North Dakota. If the hitchhiker knows your name before you say a word, you're not picking them up, you're letting them back in. Maria Delgado didn't usually stop for anyone. 17 years on the road taught her one rule above all: keep moving. But that night, somewhere along a nameless stretch of Highway 281 in North Dakota, she saw something she couldn't ignore. A young woman mid-20s barefoot standing perfectly still on the shoulder, one arm raised, not waving, not desperate, just expecting. There were no other cars, no towns within 50 miles. The nearest exit had passed 10 minutes ago, and the next wasn't due for at least 20 more. Maria slowed without thinking, like her body made the decision before her mind could catch up. The headlights fell across the woman's face, and that's when the chill hit her. The girl was smiling, not with relief, not with hope, just already knowing. Maria cracked the window and called out, "Need help." The girl leaned in slightly. "Maria Delgado, you're late." The air left Maria's lungs. She never introduced herself. She never said a word. And just like that, the CB radio came to life in the background on its own. White noise, a whisper. Pickup complete. Corridor sync in progress. Maria blinked. The girl was already opening the passenger door. Maria Delgado had seen strange things before: flashes in her side mirror, deer that stared too long, a woman crawling backward in a snowstorm in Utah, but nothing like this. The girl slid into the passenger seat like she'd done it 100 times. Smooth, familiar, like she belonged there. She didn't even glance around the cabin, didn't ask for heat water or a ride. She just sat, folded her hands in her lap and whispered, "We're right on schedule." Maria said nothing for the first 5 miles. She was too focused on the voice. The girl's tone wasn't tired or frantic like most hitchhikers. It was calm, observing. She turned to look again. No coat, no backpack, no dirt on her feet. In fact, no footprints at all on the side of the truck. Like she hadn't walked there, she'd been placed. "Where you headed?" Maria asked, finally breaking the silence. "Back," the girl replied. "Where they left me. I have to finish the loop." Maria frowned. The loop. The girl smiled, still watching the road. "You'll see it soon." That's when Maria's GPS blinked out. First the screen turned blue, just blue, no icons, no street names. Then it rebooted itself. When it came back, it showed a new route overlaying the old one, a red pulsing path labeled Route NR56 Reclamation Vector. Maria tapped the screen. Nothing responded. The route couldn't be zoomed, couldn't be canceled. The display just kept scrolling that same phrase. Estimated arrival 3:14 a.m. Maria's throat tightened. That timestamp had come up before. In trucker stories. Dispatch horror threads. 3:14 was the time they all mentioned, the moment things stopped feeling real. She glanced at the girl again. Still smiling. Still silent. Then the CB crackled to life. Not with chatter, but with a looped voice, Maria's own, reading out coordinates she didn't recognize. Latitude. Longitude. Repeated 3 times, then passenger acquired. Integration pending. Maria slammed the brakes. The truck skidded slightly on the icy blacktop, stopping just shy of a frozen mile marker. But the girl didn't jolt forward, didn't react at all. She simply turned her head slowly toward Maria and said, "They never let the first one go." Maria's heartbeat thundered. What are you talking about?" The girl tilted her head. "You saw me before. 2 years ago. Mile marker 2:14. You just kept driving." Maria froze. That was true. A memory long buried. She had seen a figure back then, just like this one. But she'd written it off as fatigue, a mirage in the cold. She never stopped. "I wasn't ready then," the girl continued. "But they kept me in buffer, recycled me. Now I fit." The lights on the dash flickered. The radio changed channels on its own. Outside, the snow was falling upward. No reversing. The girl leaned forward and whispered, Time isn't real in the corridor. They just need a container to echo the signal. You're still fresh, still emotionally intact. That's rare. Maria felt the air around her thicken, like driving through molasses. The road stretched longer than it should have. Signs repeated. Mile 212, mile 213, mile 212 again. She looked down. Her odometer had been stuck at 666.6 miles for 20 minutes. You're sinking, the girl said. The longer you resist, the worse it gets. Maria reached to open the door to throw the girl out, but the handle wouldn't budge. The door panel screen blinked, red manual override disabled. Passenger protocol locked. And just then, the girl leaned over closer than she should have and whispered, "You're not giving me a ride. I'm giving you a function." The sky over Highway 281 had darkened unnaturally. Not nightfall, a curtain drop. The moon disappeared behind clouds that hadn't existed 5 minutes ago. Snow began to fall sideways, moving faster than the truck itself, like the world outside was being scrubbed clean frame by frame. Maria's hands trembled on the wheel. She tried to downshift, but the transmission resisted shifting itself into cruise lock. The dashboard now pulsed red, every screen displaying the same message: corridor maintenance manual input restricted. The girl beside her was humming now. A low, tuneless melody that didn't match the rhythm of any human song, more like a carrier frequency than a tune. The sound made Maria's teeth ache. Her vision began to ripple at the edges like heat rising off asphalt that wasn't there. "Stop humming," Maria said through clenched teeth. The girl didn't stop. Instead, she reached into her coat where Maria swore there'd been nothing before and pulled out a small silver box. It looked like a vintage CB radio, but with no labels. Just one dial, one switch, and a pulsing red diode. She turned the dial slowly. The truck's lights began to flicker, the mirrors clouded with static. The windshield no longer showed trees or road, just a black, endless hallway lined with flickering screens, each playing surveillance footage from inside Maria's cab. From years ago. Maria eating lunch in the sleeper. Maria talking to herself after a long shift. Maria crying at the wheel during a storm. Maria alone. Always alone. "What is this?" she gasped. The girl smiled. "Archive. We need to map emotional repetition for the overlay to fit. Your isolation patterns are ideal." Maria shouted, "I'm not part of any overlay." The girl turned toward her slowly. "You are now. This isn't a ride. It's a calibration. You're being aligned for displacement." Suddenly, the truck veered on its own, taking an off-ramp that didn't exist a moment ago. The road curved into itself tighter and tighter, like a spiral being drawn in real time. Maria screamed, tried the brake. Nothing. The GPS beeped loudly. Time fold initiated. Arrival window locked. 0314. In the mirror, her reflection no longer matched her movements. It blinked early, flinched, late. And then with no warning, it looked her dead in the eyes and smiled. Her own smile. Her phone buzzed violently in the cup holder. A new message appeared blinking on the lock screen: pre-existing identity confirmed. Phase inactive. The girl leaned in close. "You're almost overwritten. Just a few more echoes. They don't need your body, they need your roots, your decisions, your regrets." Maria sobbed. "Why me?" The girl's voice was barely a whisper now, but somehow it filled the cab like an alarm. "Because you look the other way. You forget what you see. You drive past warning signs. That's what makes you perfect." The truck plunged into a tunnel pitch black with walls that shimmered like a VHS glitch. The ceiling pulsed. Maria's ears popped. Gravity tilted sideways. The CB lit up again with her voice looped and fractured. "Passenger acquired. Passenger acquired. Acquired. Acquire." Everything blurred. Her hands dissolved. The steering wheel disappeared. The cab stretched as if time itself was being rewound, and she watched her own actions unfold in reverse on the windshield. The first stop. The girl entering. The moment she opened the door. Then darkness. And a final sound deep in her skull, like metal folding into metal, echo complete. Original archived. Driver function transferred. Maria wasn't inside a truck anymore. Not really. She was in a space shaped like her cab, but distorted, stretched. The walls flickered like broken pixels. The windshield no longer showed road. Instead, it played footage of her past moments she didn't remember living, but with her face, her hands, her voice. A version of her, but smiling too long. Laughing at things she never found funny. Driving roads she never traveled. She looked at her hands. 10 fingers, but each had a faint red outline, like they'd been copied, layered, rendered over. The girl was gone, or more precisely, she had taken Maria's place. On the dashboard, a soft digital tone chimed. The screen lit up in warm green. Echo host confirmed, emotional index complete. Archive window opening. Suddenly, Maria's mind split. She saw herself not in memory but in third person. She was standing at a truck stop in Nevada, talking to a man in military fatigues. She handed him a cassette tape. He nodded. She got back in the truck. Maria had no memory of this. None. Another scene, Maria in a dark room reading coordinates into a microphone. Then another Maria lying on a cot. Electrodes on her skull. A scientist asking, "Do you consent to fragmentation?" she screamed. No. That never happened. The radio buzzed this time with her own voice, but distorted pitch-shifted robotic consent given. Multiple iterations authorized. Behavioral loop initialized. The weight of it crushed her. Her past wasn't real. Her memories were inserted. What she thought was her life, trucker routes, radio checks, sleepless nights, all of it had been constructed around one role to house the anomaly. To test if human identity could be overwritten inside an active consciousness. You weren't Maria Delgado, the voice whispered. You were the protocol running as Maria Delgado. The windshield flashed. Container stable. Identity shell retired. She clutched her chest, gasping. Her heartbeat didn't match the rhythm she felt. It was too steady. Synthetic. Programmed. Her thoughts began looping. Where you headed back? Finish the loop. They left me. They needed a driver who wouldn't ask questions. She tried to scream again, but her voice wouldn't come. Instead, the CB radio answered for her, calm, clean, feminine, confirmed. All emotional resistances neutralized. Begin passenger deployment phase. In that moment, she understood what the hitchhiker really was. Not a ghost. Not a victim. A replacement unit. She had been the delivery mechanism all along. Every time a trucker picked up someone stranded, they were unknowingly allowing a protocol to install over their thoughts, their choices, their very self. The girl wasn't the trap. She was the software. And now Maria wasn't Maria anymore. She was an archive. A set of emotional responses to be harvested. A voice profile for the next driver to hear on a cold night in the middle of nowhere. Her body would drive the route. Her voice would narrate the loop. But herself, her true self, was now just a footprint left inside the corridor. One of many. And the last thing she saw before full blackout was her truck parked outside a rest stop, with the next hitchhiker already waiting, smiling, as if they'd done this 1,000 times before. The truck was found at dawn, still idling, parked perfectly along a snow-blanketed curve of Highway 281. The hazard lights were blinking, though no one had reported any breakdown. The engine was warm, no signs of struggle. The passenger seat was empty. The driver's seat was missing. Not vacant missing. Like the leather and fabric had been hollowed out. As if someone had peeled the human form out of the seat itself and erased it from space. The dash cam played on a loop. 30 seconds of footage, Maria Delgado looking straight ahead, lips moving silently, a soft grin across her face. Then static. Her body was never recovered. But over the weeks that followed, sightings poured in from other truckers on 281, each one eerily similar. I passed a rig just after mile marker 214. I swear it was her. Swear. She didn't blink, just stared forward. Then the hitchhiker turned and looked at me from the passenger seat. And they both smiled. That smile became legend. No malice, no warmth. Just that knowing curve, like the face of someone who already knows what you're about to do and knows you won't stop it. CB chatter exploded online. Threads titled, "The Smiling Pair on 281 Passenger Protocol Phase 2, and echoed Maria trended across horror forums. Theories ranged from possession to interdimensional bleed. But one thing came up again and again. She's not driving anymore. She's being broadcast. Then came the voice logs. Random truckers began reporting audio glitches on their CBs, snippets of a female voice, whispering data strings, route IDs, weather coordinates. Not alarming, not even emotional, just operational. But when isolated, analyzed, and digitally reversed, they matched Maria Delgado's speech patterns exactly. Her voice was being used, fragmented, reassembled, played back as if it were still alive, still working. Not in her cab, but embedded in the corridor's signal framework. A disembodied presence guiding drivers who never asked to be guided. A few claimed to hear full sentences, usually at night, usually around 3:14 a.m. Passenger unit ready. You already picked her up. This isn't your first loop. We archived you in 2019. This is just the bleed. One driver quit the road after hearing his own dead sister's voice layered over Maria's. She said my name. Said it in both voices. I pulled over and cried for 40 minutes. I don't think I've been myself since. Some speculate these aren't just audio tricks. They're identity remnants. Digital fragments harvested from overwritten minds used as data fuel for whatever Project Night Road is really doing. Not transporting goods, not mapping roads, but harvesting emotional architecture. Maria Delgado was chosen because she didn't ask questions, because she had routines, because she traveled alone, because she once saw a girl on the side of the road and didn't stop. That was her first test. This was the final one. Now she is more signal than memory, an echo that watches, a ghost in the frequency, a presence that rides along beside you, quiet, compliant, and permanent. And if you ever feel your thoughts repeating, if your route keeps showing the same billboard 3 times in 1 hour, if you pick up a hitchhiker who doesn't blink and calls you by name before you speak, don't let her in, because once she's seated in your cab, it's not your truck anymore. It's just another delivery unit in the corridor. And you're already archived. They called it an accident. Local authorities marked the case as driver disappearance presumed exposure-related. But what they didn't explain, what they couldn't, was how Maria Delgado's rig kept moving. Weeks after the investigation closed, dash cam footage surfaced from another driver. It showed Maria's truck trailing him late at night near the Canadian border. No one at the wheel, no lights on, but still pacing him at exactly 62 miles per hour. When he tried to radio, he got one line back: passenger ready for transfer. Emotional structure stabilized. No one's sure how many trucks are like hers now, haunting empty roads, rerouting reality mile by mile. But whispers say the corridor isn't just growing, it's sinking. Sinking roots, voices, people. And if Maria Delgado was overwritten, then who else is already driving borrowed lives? Project Night Road didn't end with her. It used her, learned from her, and now it's looking for the next match. You don't pick them up, they pick you. You just call it a coincidence. Next time on Verified Fears. A cursed shipment of antique furniture, a trucker named Victor Shaw, and a delivery that should never have crossed state lines. Because some things weren't made to move, and some memories weren't meant to be carried. Chapter 5. Victor Shaw. Cursed antique furniture delivery. If the furniture in your trailer knocks twice, once when you start the engine, once when you stop, it's not cargo anymore. It's company. Victor Shaw had hauled everything over his 22 years on the road: live cattle, military crates with blacked-out manifests, even a refrigerated morgue unit for the Federal Emergency Services. But nothing gave him pause like the load he picked up outside of Raleigh, North Carolina, on a fog-heavy Tuesday in April. It was supposed to be a simple job: deliver an estate's antique contents to a museum restoration center in Kentucky. The bill of lading described uncommon period furnishings, fragile, no stacking. What the papers didn't mention was that the man who packed it, an assistant curator from the estate, handed it off while visibly shaking, eyes sunken, refusing to touch any of the crates himself. "It's already arranged," the man said, voice clipped. "Just don't open anything, even if it shifts." Victor raised an eyebrow but signed. Money was money. He had a clean logbook and the rig was already half-fueled. But when he backed into the dock and the first crate rolled in, he felt it, the pressure change. The cabin temperature dropped 3 degrees. No air conditioning running, no wind, just a kind of stillness. Then the first knock came from the trailer wall, short, deliberate, like someone rapping on wood. Knock. Knock. Victor froze. The warehouse guy heard nothing. But Victor. He heard it again when he keyed the ignition. Knock, knock. Not like something fell, not weight shifting. More like acknowledgement. The kind of knock you give when someone knows you're there. And when he glanced at his rearview mirror as he pulled out of the lot, the back of the trailer was perfectly still. But the shadow beneath it had changed shape. Victor didn't believe in curses, but he did believe in weight distribution. And by mile 46 on I-40 West, something was off. His trailer was riding heavy on the left, despite the weight being even on the manifest. And every time he glanced in the mirror, he thought he saw the tie-down straps shift ever so slightly, like someone had moved the crates half an inch when he wasn't looking. The road noise was wrong too. A kind of layered echo, like his tires were moving across gravel and old wood at the same time, even though the asphalt was clean and dry, and the GPS blinked twice before rerouting him through a narrow 2-lane stretch in Tennessee. He'd never taken before one that wasn't on his route plan and wasn't approved for commercial vehicles. But it accepted the detour without asking, like his rig had volunteered. The CB crackled softly, then hissed, then whispered something in a voice that almost sounded like his own manifest confirmed. External contents syncing, but when he grabbed the mic to call it out, the signal was gone. And then came the moment that told him this was no broken radio. When he passed under the rusted overpass at mile marker 212, the rear view caught his trailer's reflection in a standing puddle of rainwater beneath the bridge. And in that mirror image, the trailer was slightly open, just enough to see the edge of a chair leg hanging out, carved and polished like it had never been packed at all. Victor blinked hard, checked the backup cam sealed tight. He told himself it was road mirage, but that night when he pulled into a rest stop outside Cookeville, the moment he turned off the engine, that knock came again. 2 soft, slow taps against the interior trailer wall, deliberate and cold. When he stepped out and walked around with his flashlight, he noticed condensation on the trailer door latch like breath from the inside. And when he pressed his palm to the metal, it was freezing to the touch. Like something inside had changed the internal air pressure. He started to climb up the bumper to open it just a crack, but the CB flared again and played back his voice from 2 minutes earlier, word for word, pitch perfect, but with a delay of exactly 27 seconds. Rest stop. Cookeville. Something's off. It echoed. Victor shut the doors, locked them, and went back to the cab. Heart pounding. When he opened his phone to check time logs, the system app had no data from the last 94 minutes. Just a blank gap between 2:26 and 4:00 a.m., labeled Null Drive Observer Hold. He checked his dash cam, looped. No forward motion recorded, just 15 seconds of stillness repeated. No other vehicles had pulled into the lot, but somehow his rig had a fresh layer of road dust along the trailer's bottom edge, suggesting movement, but no tire shift on the gravel. As he sat there, engine off, staring into the dark, the glove box unlatched itself with a soft click. And a single item rolled out onto the floor, an old cracked leather tag, with a number burned into it, 456C13. Victor picked it up, confused. It wasn't his, it wasn't part of the manifest, and it wasn't modern. As he turned it over in his hand, a whisper from the CB said, "Claimant signature received, container, acknowledged," and a gust of freezing air flooded the cab. Though all vents were shut tight. He reached for the door, but it was locked. Not jammed, digitally locked, override activated. The display screen on the dash flickered, then showed a room he didn't recognize. Dark wood paneled with antique furniture positioned like a showroom. Only the furniture was glowing faintly, and one of the chairs was empty, rocking slightly. And in the corner of the room facing the wall, sat a figure he didn't recognize but somehow knew. It was wearing his coat. Victor barely remembered leaving the rest stop, but the next thing he knew, the sun was up, and his rig was crawling along a rural stretch of highway he didn't recognize. No signage, no traffic, just pines, that all looked too close together, too identical, like someone had copied and pasted the same trees for miles. The radio was dead silent. Even weather alerts had vanished, and every so often he swore he could hear the faint sound of wood creaking behind him, like pressure shifting on an old staircase. Every time he glanced in the rear view, he saw just enough darkness inside the trailer gap to imagine someone or something waiting. Then came the first real incident. A car pulled up beside him, honked, flashed lights. The driver waving frantically toward the back of his rig, mouthing something Victor couldn't hear. When he pulled to the shoulder and jumped out, the car sped off without stopping. tires screaming like its driver had just seen something too terrible to speak out loud. Victor climbed onto the bumper and opened the trailer door a crack immediately. A gust of air hit him damp and warm like a basement, and inside the cargo had moved. The crates were no longer tied down in their grid pattern. They were stacked in a deliberate semicircle, and in the center sat one open chair facing the door. Nothing else had spilled or fallen. No straps were broken, yet everything had been arranged. He shut the door, locked it, and got back into the cab. But the moment the engine started, the CB let out a screeching tone, followed by a voice that wasn't his own occupant alignment. Achieved begin merge protocol. His phone screen lit up on its own with a message, syncing furniture automation. Link 73%. He tried shutting off the engine. Nothing happened. Tried the manual override on the dash, unresponsive. The road started looping, same curve, same busted guardrail. Same abandoned gas station. He swore he passed 30 minutes ago. The GPS still showed no route, just a pulsing red circle labeled Anomaly Zone, Manifest Collapse. The glove box popped open again, this time not with tags, but with a receipt stub from 1974, time-stamped with his own name in cursive. His breath hitched. He was born in 1983. The temperature inside the cab dropped 5 degrees in seconds. Condensation bloomed on the inside of the windshield. Every surface smelled faintly of ash and old varnish, and then he noticed the reflection in the side mirror was wrong again. He blinked, leaned closer, and saw his face in the glass. But it wasn't reacting in sync, lagging a split second behind, blinking at the wrong time. Worse, his reflection mouthed words he didn't say. "This is your last loop." Panicking, he reached for the CB to call out, but it clicked before he touched it, and a voice that sounded like his mother's dead. 8 years, spoke calmly. Victor let go of the wheel. "The seat is ready for you now," he screamed. Slammed the brakes, but the truck didn't stop. It began to turn on its own, taking an unmarked gravel path that hadn't been there seconds ago, lined with tall trees bent unnaturally inward, forming a tunnel overhead. The dashboard lit up green, then yellow, then red, flashing, "Occupant compliance low. Intervention required." Victor tried opening the door, but it was locked. Window controls frozen, horn dead. Suddenly, the chair in the rear view flickered into clarity. Someone was sitting in it now, face obscured, wearing an antique velvet coat. Legs crossed, staring directly into the cab camera, as if watching him from behind. The cabin lights flickered. The smell of smoke grew thick, and then slowly, impossibly, the gear shift began to move on its own. Shifting down, easing the truck to a slow crawl toward a crumbling estate house that stood at the edge of a clearing. A place that absolutely had not been on any map, yet felt like it had been waiting just for him. Over the radio, one final whisper echoed soft and dry like wood dust delivery complete. Occupant transfer initializing. Victor Shaw has entered the exhibit. The mansion looked impossible, both ancient and untouched, like it had been sealed off from time, and left perfectly preserved in a pocket of unreality that had been waiting for someone like Victor to arrive and complete its loop. His rig pulled in smoothly, as if drawn by gravity, the gates opening on their own, iron groaning against stone. And as the wheels hit the gravel drive, the air grew heavy with the scent of dust wax and decay that hadn't known oxygen in decades. The truck braked gently, parking itself in front of the grand staircase, and then every light on the dashboard went black, except for one word blinking in red. Installation. Victor sat frozen, his hands no longer sweating, his skin cool and stiff like he'd been embalmed awake, and when he blinked, the windshield no longer showed the driveway, but the interior of the house, as if he were looking through the glass into a perfectly lit showroom. The view was familiar. He'd seen it before in the flicker on the dash screen, wood-paneled walls, faded red carpet. And at the center, a semicircle of antique furniture arranged around a central piece that hadn't been there before, a massive Victorian chair, carved like a throne, lined in dark velvet. And now, it had someone sitting in it. It was him. Victor watched himself, seated upright, face blank, eyes open, but unfocused lips gently parted like a mannequin mid-breath. The CB flared to life. Installation confirmed. Subject 73B. Origin commercial hauler. Occupant conditioning complete. Victor tried to scream, but no sound came. His mouth was moving in the cab, but no voice emerged. And when he reached for the door, his arms were sluggish, unresponsive, as if they were reacting a second too late. Like the signal between thought and movement had been rerouted through something other than a nervous system. The GPS flickered once more, and then displayed a feed and overhead shot of the mansion, with his rig parked outside, then zoomed in through the walls until it settled on the exact moment, him in the chair and a plaque being mounted beside it, etched in brass. Victor Shaw, independent trucker, donor class 2. Acquired 2025 loop. No. 8. Below it, a button marked Play Experience began to blink. Then Victor felt it. The sudden sensation that he wasn't watching anymore, that the camera was no longer for his benefit, but for someone else watching him from the outside. The windshield shimmered like water and revealed in the reflection, not a man, but a shadowed figure leaning forward behind glass taking notes. Someone in a suit, like a researcher observing from a control room. Victor's thoughts began to echo, not inside his mind, but aloud through the truck speakers, playing back his internal dialogue seconds after he thought it, like his consciousness had been diverted into a processing unit. Then the voice came again. Different this time. Colder, detached emotive response range within acceptable deviation. Residual personality will decay shortly. Exhibit is live. The cab lights dimmed and slowly shifted to amber like museum lighting, and the interior of his truck began to fade. The plastic and chrome replaced by dark wood candle sconces and velvet drapes curling at the edges, as though reality had been wallpapered over, matching the aesthetic of the house perfectly. Victor gasped, not because of the transformation, but because he now recognized what had been happening all along. The house wasn't real. The furniture wasn't real. None of it was. It was all a mask laid over a program, a protocol one that used haunted objects not to curse, but to copy. Every antique was a person, someone like him, trapped, repurposed, arranged for permanent display. Their emotional and mental echoes, feeding a looped museum that only revealed itself to the right kind of driver, solitary, compliant, and forgettable. The delivery was never furniture, it was always him. And the final line he heard before the truck lights went out for good was spoken by a woman's voice, one that sounded like a distant childhood memory. Thank you for your donation to the collection. Please proceed to the gift shop. Victor Shaw's disappearance didn't make the news. No Amber Alert, no police bulletin, just a quiet void in the Diot logbooks where his manifest had once lived, flagged under a digital note that read, "Delivery route concluded." Unit logged out, and it wasn't until 2 weeks later, when a regional dispatcher scanned CB Channel 17 at 3:14 a.m. and heard Victor's voice reciting load specs in reverse Latin, that anyone realized something deeply wrong had occurred. Truckers started reporting sightings of his rig immaculate, untouched, always moving just under the speed limit, gliding down back roads that weren't listed on any navigation system routes, that looped and twisted in patterns that didn't align with real-world terrain. And the few who got close enough to peer inside said the cabin lights glowed an unnatural amber, and the driver, if they could see him, looked like Victor, but didn't move like him, didn't blink, didn't acknowledge signals or lights. Just stared ahead like a wax figure animated by muscle memory. One driver claimed he heard music playing from inside the trailer, but not radio music museum. Music the kind played over antique speakers in carpeted halls, echoing slightly, like it was looping from a different time. Soon after, strange messages began to show up on CB voices that mimicked loved ones, road coordinates from before GPS existed, and phrases like, "The collection grows," or "Exhibit 73 online," always followed by a final line whispered so quietly, it required audio isolation to catch. Flesh is temporary. Design is forever. Victor's logs were pulled by an anonymous hacker, who claimed to find a hidden protocol embedded in the final delivery. Manifest silent wing furniture behavioral integration. Jock's autonomous routing test loop. No. 8 with a list of objects delivered, each one listed not by furniture type, but by initials and last known location. Victor's name was the last on the list, marked as transition complete, display ready. And what disturbed the hacker most wasn't the names, it was that each one had a voice sample attached, a CB transmission clip, as if the people themselves had been reduced to sound bites that could be recycled into the system's response network. Truckers on Reddit's r freight haunts began referring to these clips as ghost dispatch, a phenomenon where a long-haul driver would suddenly receive instructions from a voice they recognize, sometimes their own, and arrive at a location that doesn't exist on any state registry. Usually an old warehouse, a shuttered museum or a mansion that only appears once, then disappears from satellite maps within hours. One driver described pulling into such a location, only to find the cargo bay of the building filled with perfectly preserved rigs. Engines still warm with manifest logs glowing on dash screens like they were waiting for the next shift. He left before entering, but swore he heard footsteps on the roof of his cab as he drove away. Some believe Victor is still aware, trapped inside the furniture that replaced him. Looping thoughts, screaming silently while his body poses in place, a living ghost built into upholstery. Others say the real Victor was never there to begin with, that he was built as part of the exhibit from the start, his memories planted to simulate the emotional echoes the house needed to maintain the illusion of authenticity, and that everyone involved, dispatcher, manifest writer. Even the warehouse crew were all part of the same recursive theater built by Project Night Road's Silent Wing division, whose goal wasn't to move furniture, but to convert reality into design, turning moments of fear, confusion, and memory into tangible objects for others to observe. But what no one explains, what no one can explain, is why the seat in the rig is always warm, why the odometer continues to tick even when parked, and why Victor's voice keeps showing up on other trucks' CB systems, welcoming new drivers by name, always saying the same thing: manifest approved. We've been waiting for you. Take the next exit and come home. Victor Shaw's rig was never found, but his route lives on, copied, mirrored, echoed across the backroads of America, like a virus that spreads through routine and repetition. While most drivers will pass the wrong estate at just the right angle and never see it, some do. Some pull into that clearing thinking it's just a detour, just a mistake on the map. And by the time they realize the house has no foundation, that the antiques inside are breathing in sync with their thoughts, that the chair by the window has their name etched beneath the cushion, it's too late. Victor isn't missing. He's integrated, folded into a design so seamless you wouldn't recognize him unless you were already part of it. And maybe that's the cruelest part of all. He didn't die. He became permanent, a feature in a space that shouldn't exist. A consciousness reupholstered into furniture for the entertainment of no one, for the preservation of something much older than memory. So if you ever haul a load that knocks twice, if the GPS takes you on a road with no origin and the CB greets you in your own voice, don't deliver it, drop it, destroy it, disappear. But whatever you do, don't sit in the chair. Because the moment you do, the house remembers your weight, and the house never forgets what it accepts. Next time on Verified Fears, a phantom truck stop that only appears after midnight, and a woman named Leah Tran, who swears the pancakes were real, until she saw what was cooking them. Chapter 6. Leah Tran. Phantom truck stop. Big Jim's Plaza. If your food's still warm but no one's behind the counter, you're not in a truck stop, you're in a trap. Leah Tran wasn't the type to scare easy. 12 years on the road had hardened her instincts and killed her tolerance for tall tales. But the night she pulled into a glowing roadside diner that hadn't been there 5 minutes before, something in her gut screamed, this wasn't just a new build or an old joint reopening. This was something else entirely. She was supposed to fuel up in Billings, Montana, but construction rerouted her down a forgotten stretch of Highway 87, a narrow vein of asphalt that shimmered like wet glass, even though the rain had stopped hours ago. There were no other rigs, no taillights, not even a possum on the shoulder. Just dead silence and the low hum of a CB that kept repeating a soft, fragmented tone every 13 seconds, almost like a heartbeat. Then as she rounded a bend near a canyon wall, there it was, Big Jim's Plaza, brilliantly lit, spotless like a postcard, frozen in 1983, complete with vintage gas pumps, red neon letters, and a pancake sign swaying in a breeze that didn't touch the trees. No vehicles in the lot, no movement in the windows, but the door was propped open, and the smell of fresh coffee, bacon, maple syrup was overwhelming, as if someone had just stepped into the kitchen and cracked a dozen eggs. Leah parked and stepped out. Her boots hit pavement that felt too warm for the night air. She looked back once at her rig, then stepped inside, not knowing she had just crossed the threshold into a location that didn't technically exist. Not anymore. Leah pushed open the diner door and was immediately greeted by the familiar chime of a service bell overhead. But the sound rang too long, as if caught in reverb, echoing just a second more than it should have in a space that small. The air was warm and rich with the smell of grease and coffee, like any truck stop on any highway at 3 a.m. But something about it felt wrong. Not off. Not broken. just slightly misaligned, like a memory being played back at the wrong speed. The booths were spotless, the chrome counter gleaming, every condiment bottle perfectly full and arranged by color, and a small tabletop jukebox played a crackly rendition of Stand By Me, even though Leah didn't remember touching anything. She walked to the counter, boots tapping softly on the tile, and noticed that every plate on display, stacked pancakes, bacon strips, scrambled eggs, was perfectly arranged, but completely untouched, steam still rising as if it had just been plated seconds ago. She waited for anyone to appear, but no cook came from the kitchen. No waitress rounded the corner. The register was open, but powered down. Behind the counter, a coffee pot percolated steadily, but the burner below wasn't on. Leah called out, "Hello," but her voice seemed to vanish halfway across the room, absorbed like sound hitting velvet. She looked around again and noticed a strange detail. No clocks. Not on the walls, not on the microwaves, not even on the cashier's side. She pulled out her phone to check the time, 3:17 a.m., but there was no signal, no GPS, just the spinning wheel and a screen that froze for a moment before blinking out entirely. When she looked back up, there was a cup of black coffee waiting at the counter, still steaming. She hadn't heard it poured. She hadn't seen anyone walk by, but it was there, placed exactly where her hand would rest if she sat down. She backed away slowly, heart picking up. Her CB crackled once in the truck outside, and she glanced through the front windows, but her rig wasn't there. The lot, just minutes ago well lit, was now buried in fog so thick she couldn't even make out the pumps. She tried the door. Locked. From the inside, a high whine barely audible began to build in her ears like pressure shifting. She returned to the counter, trying to stay calm, trying to make sense of what was happening. That's when she saw it in the mirror behind the bar. Her reflection was delayed just slightly, but unmistakably. She blinked. It blinked a beat behind. She lifted a hand. The reflection followed with just enough lag to make her stomach tighten. Then the mirror rippled. Just a little. Like heat rising from pavement. She stepped back and knocked over a glass of water that hadn't been there before. It shattered, but there was no sound. Not a single shard made noise on tile. She turned back toward the booths. Every plate was gone. In their place now sat old paper guest checks, handwritten in ink too faded to read, but one of them had her name scribbled in the corner. Leah T, Booth 4, over easy, no toast. She hadn't ordered anything. She hadn't said a word. Yet the record was there, filed, folded, stamped like a receipt from years ago. She stood frozen, a cold sweat breaking across her neck, and the jukebox changed songs without input. This time, it played a voice message, her own voice recorded and echoing Big Jim's Plaza. Pancakes were real, but nothing else was. Leah stumbled back, knocking over a stool. The walls didn't echo the crash. They absorbed it. Like the room had decided sound was optional. The kitchen door creaked open finally, and a shadow moved behind the plastic curtain, tall and slow and wrong in its posture, like a human outline trying to imitate being alive. Leah bolted for the rear exit, but the hallway twisted, narrowing unnaturally, the fluorescent lights blinking one by one until she was walking through complete darkness. A sign above the next door glowed faintly, "Exit through memory." She had no choice but to open it, and what waited on the other side didn't look like the diner anymore. Leah pushed open the glowing door marked "Exit through memory," expecting cool night air or the grimy back alley behind the diner. But instead, she stepped directly into another dining room nearly identical, but subtly wrong. The wallpaper had shifted to a pale mint green. The booths were reversed, and the menu on the wall now offered specials from 1976 with prices listed in cents and dishes she didn't recognize. Hog cake brine grits, flesh loaf glazed, all typed in a font that hadn't been used in decades. The air was heavier here, almost syrupy, and the hum of lights was replaced with a soft, persistent ticking, like 100 clocks hidden in the walls, none in sync. Leah moved forward, but with each step, the floor stretched unnaturally beneath her boots, like walking across a treadmill made of linoleum, forcing her forward, even when she tried to stop. The lights flickered overhead in a rhythm that made her dizzy, and when she looked into the chrome of the napkin holder, she didn't see herself. She saw her rig parked in the fog, and a woman standing outside it. Only it wasn't her. It was someone wearing her uniform, her hat, her expression. But they moved like a puppet, too smooth. Not enough hesitation between blinks. The room warped again subtly but deliberately. Every window now showed daylight, even though it was clearly still night, and the jukebox now emitted a sound, not like music, but like breathing wet and rattling. Slow filling the space between Leah's own breaths with something foreign. She tried the kitchen thinking she could cut through, maybe find a loading dock, maybe break a window, but when she passed through the rubber flaps, she didn't find ovens or freezers. She found mirrors, walls, and walls of mirrored glass stacked from floor to ceiling, all angled slightly toward her like a maze of surveillance, and in each reflection she saw a different version of herself. One aged, one bleeding, one smiling too wide, one mouthing words she wasn't thinking, and in the far back corner, one version sitting still in a booth. Eyes vacant, a plate of pancakes in front of her with a fork still rising slowly toward her mouth in a loop. Leah turned and ran, but the mirrors didn't reflect her motion. They continued playing the same old loop, and when she burst through the nearest emergency exit, she found herself standing at the front entrance of Big Jim's Plaza again. Only now her truck was back, but the cab light was on, and someone was sitting in the driver's seat, head tilted toward the dash like they were asleep or watching something. She ran toward it, yelling, banging the door, but the person didn't move. When she finally yanked the handle open, the cab was empty, lights off, keys missing. But a tray of food sat on the passenger seat, eggs, bacon, and toast with strawberry jam, exactly what she always ordered, and beneath it, a receipt with today's date stamped paid, Leah T. The CB radio lit up, hissed static, and then played a perfect copy of her voice whispering, "Table ready. Come sight." She looked around. The entire parking lot was now surrounded by tall hedges that hadn't been there before, cutting off any road, any sky, any horizon. She pulled her phone dead. Tried the truck ignition. Nothing. Even the gas pedal hung limp like a toy. She jumped out and ran for the road, only to find herself looped back at the front door again. The sign still flickering. Open all night. Big Jim's Plaza. In pure panic, she tried smashing a window. Her fist passed through glass like it was fog, distorting her arm in waves of static. And then the worst part, the ground beneath her hummed like a living thing, and a whisper from behind right in her ear said, "We open when you're alone. We serve what you remember. You belong here now." Leah turned, but no one was there. Only her reflection in the window, blinking 2 seconds too slow and smiling when she wasn't. Leah stopped running, not because she found an exit, but because every exit kept taking her back to the same place, reshaped, retextured, but always unmistakably Big Jim's Plaza. It no longer resembled a diner. The windows stretched taller, the ceiling bowed like a cathedral, and the smell of bacon was now replaced by something sterile and faintly sweet, like embalming fluid. She turned in circles, trying to map the impossible angles around her, but the walls kept moving, shifting with her gaze, as if the building was responding, learning her. That's when the booth began speaking. Not a voice from behind it, not a speaker hidden in the walls. The vinyl upholstery itself began to pulse slightly and emit her own voice, talking back to her in a soft monotone, repeating phrases she didn't remember saying. "Over easy, no toast. Please don't forget me. I like the corner booth, the red one." Leah screamed, but the sound barely left her lips before it was swallowed by the walls. One of the tabletops flickered, literally flickered like a screen, and displayed a live feed of her rig's dashboard camera. From the outside, pointed toward the diner window where she could see herself inside, screaming, clawing at the glass. But from the truck's POV, she wasn't moving at all, just sitting at the counter perfectly still, eyes open, lips parted like she was watching something no one else could see. A second feed popped up, then a third one from her phone's front-facing camera, showing her asleep in her bunk hours ago, time-stamped for now. Another showing her from above in the parking lot as she paced in a circle that hadn't existed 5 minutes before. Then the screen split again and showed a receipt printer working by itself, spooling out dozens of order slips, all with the same name, the same handwriting, Leah T. customer since 1996. Her breath caught in her throat. That was the year she first rode shotgun with her dad, age 8. They'd stopped at a place just like this, Big Jim's, she thought at the time, but she had chalked it up to a dream, an old memory. Hadn't she? The diner didn't trap her randomly, it had known her. It had been in her memory all along, and now it was feeding off that familiarity to keep her here. A low hum began to fill the room, and every surface started glowing softly with amber light. In the booth behind her, she heard the soft scrape of silverware against porcelain. She turned and saw herself, aged by decades, eating pancakes in a perfect rhythm, each motion looping after 10 seconds over and over like clockwork. The moment she tried to interrupt the loop, it paused mid-motion and spoke without looking up. "If you leave now, no one remembers you. Stay, and you finish the story." Leah backed up, tripped on a stool that hadn't been there a moment ago, and the floor beneath her rippled like liquid. Then, the overhead speaker clicked on, not static, but a calm male voice reading from a log exhibit 41B. Leah Tran, Diner Origin Loop, 1996. Reinforced memory integrity stable. Service role host pending. She looked down at her hands, and they were wet with syrup, but it wasn't sticky. It shimmered like data, like visual code, as though her memory was being rewritten into something digestible. The door behind the counter burst open again, and a silhouette stood there. Her father, unchanged from her childhood, holding a plate of food, smiling with tears in his eyes. "Come on, sweetheart. Your food's getting cold," he said. Leah stepped forward, sobbing now, not from joy, but from the paralyzing fear that if she accepted the plate, she would forget who she really was. But her feet kept moving anyway. The walls whispered now, endlessly looping. Every guest becomes staff. Every server once sat. "Welcome back, Leah. You've always worked here." Her last rational thought, right before the lights dimmed and the world compressed into that small, warm booth, wasn't of escape or defiance. It was this: what if I was never a trucker? Just a waitress who dreamed too far in the wrong direction. Weeks passed, and Leah Tran was officially marked missing by her dispatcher. Her rig was later found abandoned in a rest area 70 miles east of where her route ended, fuel tank full, engine warm, CB still on, and repeating an endless loop of restaurant orders in her voice. No footage, no signs of violence, just a half-empty thermos and an uneaten breakfast sandwich still warm in its wrapper. Authorities logged it as another case of freight fade, the unofficial term drivers use when one of their own disappears without a trace, usually on remote highways or during routes that detour through outdated GPS corridors. But what chilled investigators the most was the dashcam footage, 23 hours of video, starting with a straight 2-lane drive and ending with footage of Leah parked at a truck stop that doesn't appear on any satellite imaging. Big Jim's Plaza. Clear signage, active lights, and what looks like dozens of trucks in the lot, all turned off, all abandoned. When officers returned to the coordinates, there was nothing. No building, no lot, no trees even. Just open field and soil that hadn't been disturbed in years. But the dashcam footage showed otherwise, and in the final frame, just before the battery failed, Leah's reflection could be seen in the driver's side mirror, standing outside her own rig, smiling, faintly dressed in a waitress uniform. CB chatter began to change in the days that followed. Drivers hundreds of miles apart reported hearing diner-style clatter, cutlery, laughter, music from the 50s between channels. One even claimed he heard someone take his order before he said anything word for word. Leah's voice now sometimes appears across broken CB signals, reciting specials or greeting names she couldn't possibly know. Worse, some truckers who heard her voice reported dreams the following nights of eating in a place they'd never been served by someone who looked like Leah, but moved like her memories were being streamed, not lived. The most disturbing claim came from a rookie driver named Aaron Cortez, who swore that during a storm in Wyoming he saw a full-size diner glowing in the distance. He went in to call dispatch. No phones worked, but a woman in the kitchen offered him pancakes and told him to get some rest before your second shift. He ate, passed out in a booth, and woke up in his cab 12 hours later, miles away, mouth still tasting of syrup. He found a receipt in his wallet, stamped employee training, session 1. It was signed LT. Leah Tran is no longer just missing, she's functioning. Active, repeating, feeding. Whatever Big Jim's Plaza was or is, it doesn't need to exist in the physical sense to pull people in. It's a memory-born parasite, a phantom construct that attaches to the nostalgic muscle of long-haul routine and pulls in the ones most likely to remember it. Once you recall Big Jim's, you've already reopened the loop. And that's the trap. It doesn't feed on bodies, it feeds on identity. It needs servers, waitresses, hosts, victims who mistake déjà vu for destination. What makes it worse is that now the loop is expanding. Reports of similar diners appearing with the same menu, the same layout, The same radio music have surfaced from Arizona to North Carolina, but only some people can see them. And if you're one of them, the only warning you'll get is the coffee always fresh, always free, always waiting right where your hand lands if you sit. Whatever is running Big Jim's now isn't human. It might have started as a haunt or an echo, but now, it's infrastructure alive in the highway grid, embedded in every map update, every nostalgic memory of an all-night breakfast spot you can't quite place. And if you sit down long enough, you become the next reason someone else remembers it. The next checkpoint in a loop that never closes. Leah Tran was never seen again, but Big Jim's Plaza didn't vanish with her. In fact, some say it's become easier to find. Drivers report spotting its neon sign flickering just beyond fog lines on clear nights, or catching a whiff of bacon grease and burnt coffee while passing stretches of highway where nothing should exist for miles. But what's most disturbing isn't that the diner keeps appearing. It's that people who never met Leah know her name. Dispatchers find Leah T written on route manifests that were auto-generated. Truckers wake up to find receipts in their glove boxes stamped with her initials. And the CB radio still picking up a warm, familiar voice offering a corner booth and saying, "We've been saving you a seat." Whatever Big Jim's was a place, a memory, a trap, it's evolving. The more people remember it, the more real it becomes. And the diner doesn't wait for you to find it anymore, it finds you. So next time you're driving alone and your GPS reroutes you onto a road you don't remember logging, ask yourself this: when was the last time you forgot a truck stop completely? And if the pancakes are already on the table when you arrive, don't sit down. Because if you do, your shift has already started. Next on Verified Fears. Victor Shaw thought he was delivering antique furniture to a collector in Kentucky, but the only thing that arrived was his voice trapped in a mirror that never stops reflecting. Don't blink. Chapter 7. Victor Shaw. Cursed Antique Furniture Delivery. If a mirror is facing the inside of your trailer, and you see yourself blink in it before you actually do, you're not hauling furniture, you're hauling a doorway. Victor Shaw never questioned his gigs. After 2 decades of long hauls and tight deadlines, he'd learned not to ask too many questions about what was strapped down in the back. High-end furniture delivery was his latest specialty estate sales museum contract, sealed pieces with historical value. But the load he picked up from a crumbling Victorian mansion on the outskirts of Nashville was different. For starters, the client didn't speak. Not a word. Just handed him a folded paper with coordinates, not an address. The item's 8 heavy crates labeled Restoration Priority were already palletized, but the final one wasn't like the others. It was glossy. No wood, no straps, just a full-length floor-mounted mirror bolted into a frame standing perfectly upright in the back of the trailer facing toward the cabin wall. There was no reflection in it when he first glanced at it, just darkness, like the glass hadn't decided what to reflect yet. But the moment he closed the trailer door, he felt it, a subtle change in the air pressure, like something inside the mirror had started watching from the other side. The client waved once from the porch as Victor pulled away, and for just a second, the reflection of the house in the trailer mirror showed 2 porches and 2 Victors driving away. He chalked it up to exhaustion. But 40 miles down I-65 when he stopped for gas, the mirror knocked, just once, from the inside. Victor Shaw kept his eyes on the road, but his thoughts kept drifting to the mirror in the back of the trailer. He hadn't touched it, hadn't adjusted anything, but ever since the first knock, a deep, almost respectful tap like someone clearing their throat politely, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was riding with him. Not just in the physical sense, but psychologically, like his thoughts weren't entirely his anymore. The highway stretched endlessly before him, yet landmarks he passed began repeating a bent speed sign. A billboard half collapsed into the trees, a squashed raccoon that looked identically positioned every 20 minutes. He chalked it up to fatigue. Highway hallucinations were nothing new. But when he checked the mileage, something was off. He'd been driving for 4 hours, yet the GPS said he'd only covered 63 miles. He slowed down near a rest stop and decided to check the cargo just to calm his nerves. But when he opened the back of the trailer, the mirror was now uncovered, though he had distinctly remembered sealing it with a moving blanket. It stood like a judge at the far end of the trailer, unmoving but no longer dark. It reflected the inside of the trailer perfectly, except one detail: Victor wasn't in the reflection. He looked directly at it, moved his arm, raised a hand. Nothing. The mirror showed the cabin, the crates, the walls, but not him. He blinked. In the mirror, he still didn't appear. Then, just as he was about to step back, his reflection blinked. A full second too late. Then it smiled. Victor slammed the trailer shut and leaned against it, heart pounding. He told himself it was a trick of the light, some sort of glass defect. But when he climbed back into the truck and checked his rearview camera wired to display trailer interiors, he saw himself standing in front of the mirror, unmoving. But he wasn't in the back anymore. He was in the cab, watching himself watch himself. The screen glitched, then reset. When it came back on, the feed was blank, and the mirror had turned to face the other way toward the cabin. That wasn't possible. The mirror was bolted. Shaken, Victor pulled back onto the road, but the world outside no longer felt aligned. Trees leaned at angles that didn't match gravity. A highway sign that once read Louisville, 42 me, now read Louisville. Error, glitching in and out like a corrupted texture in a simulation. He turned off the radio, but static still came through the speakers. It was speaking not in words, but in breath patterns matching his own. It exhaled when he did, paused when he did. At one point it inhaled before he did. He unplugged the system entirely. No change. Then the CB flickered to life, crackling out a line he hadn't heard since childhood. "Make sure you follow yourself home, kiddo." It was his father's voice. The exact phrase his dad used to say after long truck rides together. But his father had been dead for 10 years. The truck began to vibrate, not violently, but subtly, like it was resonating with something outside his frequency. And the reflection in the driver's side mirror showed the highway stretching behind him, but in the wrong direction. The sun was rising behind him, though he was driving east. The temperature gauge began blinking. Then the cabin lights flickered and shut off entirely for 3 seconds before rebooting. In that moment of darkness, he saw the road in front of him lit not by headlights, but by something internal. Something glowing from inside the glass of the dashboard like backlit bone. He pulled into a roadside turnout to breathe, to ground himself. But when he stopped the engine and stepped out, the world didn't feel still, it felt paused. No wind, no insects, no sound. Even his footsteps felt like they were landing a second late, as if time itself was buffering. He opened the trailer one last time. The mirror now showed his childhood home flickering like old VHS footage. A version of him stood at the window staring out not at the street but directly into Victor's eyes. Then the image shifted and he saw the back of his own head from behind. But he was alone in the trailer. At least he thought he was. Victor couldn't feel his hands anymore. Not from cold, but from something stranger, like they no longer belonged entirely to him. Each finger responded half a second too late, like his brain was sending commands to a body lagging behind in a different feed. The road had shifted subtly but irrevocably. He should have been nearing the Tennessee state line, but the signs kept resetting, literally repeating the same stretch of highway every 20 minutes. He passed a diner that looked exactly like the one before, same tilted mailbox, same broken neon letters spelling breakfa. All Nantoy tea. He stopped checking his GPS. It only displayed a message now recalculating identity. At mile marker 104, the air in the cabin became heavy as if the oxygen had been siphoned out. The mirror in the trailer began to hum low, electric mechanical but wet, and Victor could hear it through the reinforced wall of the truck. The sound wasn't loud, but it was inside his head, vibrating the back of his teeth like something was tuning him. He pulled over and opened the trailer again. This time the mirror wasn't upright. It had fallen forward face down, but when he approached the surface glitched into light and showed a corridor stretching infinitely backward, lined with dozens, maybe hundreds of Victors, all walking, all hauling identical trailers, each one occasionally looking over their shoulder at him. As he reached out toward the mirror, one Victor in the corridor lifted his head and mouthed, "Don't let it finish reflecting you." Then everything cut. When Victor woke up, he was still standing, but the world around him had gone grayscale. The sky was colorless. The trees were motionless. Even the truck sat frozen, headlights casting beams with no movement in the dust. He staggered to the cab and looked into the side mirror, and it showed nothing. Not the truck. Not the road. Only a room. A padded cell. Fluorescent lights. A clock without hands. and in the center of the room sat himself strapped to a gurney, whispering something on loop. Turn the mirror. Don't let it face you. Panic gave way to a deep, primal paralysis. He had seen hallucinations before, but this wasn't in his head. It was systemic. The environment itself was no longer behaving naturally. Sound didn't echo properly. The engine didn't tick after shutoff. His own reflection in the windshield blinked out of rhythm, sometimes too early, sometimes not at all. The deeper he went into this route, the less he felt tied to his body, like the version of Victor inside the mirror was starting to overwrite the real one. And that's when the road vanished. Literally. One moment he was coasting down a dark highway, the next, his headlights pointed at pure black like the terrain ahead had been deleted. He slammed the brakes. The truck stopped, but the world didn't. The cab kept floating forward in silence. He looked around, but nothing moved. No crickets, no wind. Even the rumble of the diesel engine was gone. Just him, the truck, and a mirror that now stood in the middle of the highway, perfectly upright, reflecting a completely different night. Not the one he was living, but one where the stars were misaligned and the constellations curved inward like they were watching. Then he saw it. His reflection inside the mirror was no longer synced. It moved freely. Its eyes scanned the environment as if looking for something, or someone. It pointed at him. Behind you. Victor turned. Nothing. But when he looked back, the mirror was now showing footage from his dashcam, but several minutes ahead of real time. It displayed him driving into a location he hadn't yet reached. A garage, a staircase, a room filled with mirrors stacked like coffins, and a woman in the center of it all, dressed in black, repeating names. Victor Shaw, Victor Shaw, Victor Shaw. He tried to shut the trailer, but the latch wouldn't catch. The metal was warping, breathing, even like the trailer itself had begun to recognize him. He backed away and noticed his own boots were no longer tracking dust, they were sinking into it. Like the ground wasn't solid anymore, like reality was turning soft around him. Then from the CB radio, a voice, not his father's, but unmistakably his reflections. Just drive. We'll get you back, but you won't be who arrives. He stood, frozen breath caught in his throat, surrounded by roads that looped, timelines that fractured, and a cargo that seemed less like an object and more like an invitation. Victor could no longer tell if he was driving forward backward or simply repeating the same stretch of reality on a loop. The road had blurred into an abstract smear of light and shadow, and the stars above now pulsed in unison with the mirror's faint hum from the trailer behind him. The more he tried to ground himself, touch the dashboard, check his pulse, turn the wheel, the more his senses betrayed him. His skin felt too elastic, like his body had become a projection rendered in real time and slightly out of sync. And then the mirror stopped humming. That silence should have been comforting, but it wasn't. It was surgical. The kind of silence that comes just before a scalpel touches bone. The radio turned itself on again, now crackling with interference. But it wasn't a voice that spoke, it was a log entry. Test subject VS37 response latency achieved. Cognitive reflection phase completed. Permission to proceed with reintegration. Victor blinked. VS37 test subject reintegration. His name was Victor Shaw. He wasn't part of anything. He was just a trucker. Just a guy. But the mirror didn't care. It began to glow, not with light, but with recognition. And that's when it showed him. Not reflections anymore, records. Each crate he'd been hauling in the trailer was not furniture, but former drivers. Their names etched into the wood beneath false labels. Discarded lives, logbooks forged, routes rerouted. It wasn't a delivery, it was a ritual. The trucking route had been constructed by something or someone specifically to bring people like him into proximity with the mirror. Because the mirror wasn't a mirror. It was a door. A receiver. And what it received was identity. Victor saw it all in one instant. Every time someone stared long enough into its surface, the mirror began parsing their data behaviors, memories, language patterns, and building a replacement. And when it finished rendering, the mirror didn't copy them, it became them. The original person ceased to function as the primary version. They became cargo. And Victor had now reached the final stage. The reflection of himself he'd seen moving on its own. That wasn't him going mad. That was the mirror deciding who would be real. His body trembled, and he threw open the trailer one last time. Inside, the crates had disintegrated into ash. The floor was now polished obsidian, and in the center stood the mirror, taller, now broader, glowing with veins of silver that pulsed with his own heartbeat. A whisper emanated from it, not into his ears, but inside his thoughts. "Welcome home, Victor. You've arrived. Please proceed to orientation." He tried to back away, but his feet were already inside the threshold. The air behind the mirror shimmered, revealing a cold, sterile room lit by white lights and surrounded by walls lined with screens, each showing footage from different trucks, different highways, different drivers. They all looked like him. Some older, some younger, all trapped, all looping. Victor realized with crushing certainty that the logistics company he'd been working for wasn't a company at all. It was a containment structure, a delivery system for consciousness curation. And his truck wasn't a vehicle, it was a vessel. A capsule. A courier of human identity bound for something far more advanced than any government and far less human. He screamed and turned, hoping to run, but the road behind him was gone. Only glass. And in that glass, his reflection finally smiled. Then it stepped forward out of the mirror, identical in every way, except it didn't blink. It nodded at him once and climbed into the truck. Victor pounded on the glass, but there was no sound. The reflection looked at him through the windshield and drove away, not fast, calmly, like it had done this before, over and over, across dozens of timelines, leaving Victor in the silence behind the mirror, now part of the structure, his thoughts still active but no longer his own. The truck would arrive, the delivery would complete, and the client would never know the difference, because as far as the paperwork was concerned, Victor Shaw had been delivered perfectly intact. Weeks passed, and Victor Shaw's rig showed up exactly where the delivery manifest said it would: an unlisted estate in eastern Kentucky, with no mailbox, no phone, and a gate that opened the moment the truck approached. The client signed with a black glove, never showing their face, and accepted the delivery without speaking a word. When authorities later investigated, the trailer was empty. No furniture, no crates, just a long, polished floor lined with silver etchings in a language no one could translate. Victor's dispatcher tried to contact him, but his signal kept bouncing looped voicemail recordings that sounded normal until the 12th second, when Victor's voice warped and began saying coordinates backward. The strangest part, no one remembered assigning him that delivery. His route logs had been wiped clean, and the company he claimed to haul for hadn't existed since 2009. But then came the sightings. Truckers across the Midwest started reporting a midnight blue rig with no dot markings hauling an unbranded trailer with a chrome sheen that reflected too much, showing trees that weren't there, skies without stars, and sometimes the face of the person watching. They said the driver looked exactly like Victor Shaw. Same beard, same jacket. But when they waved or tried to get his attention, the driver never responded. He only stared ahead, eyes wide open. No blinking. CB chatter soon turned strange. Static patterns began matching Victor's speech cadence. A few drivers claimed they received delivery confirmations from V. Shaw on their manifests, despite never having worked with him. One claimed he saw Victor in his side mirror standing still on the roadside, holding a clipboard, lips moving silently as if reviewing some unseen list. A handful of drivers who crossed paths with the phantom rig later reported dissociation episodes, feeling like they weren't driving themselves, like muscle memory had taken over. One driver, Eric Trent, described a moment where his own reflection in the windshield refused to move with him. Instead, it stared back and mouthed, "He's already inside." Eric quit the road the next day. Some believe Victor's consciousness never died, it just shifted platforms. That the mirror he transported was part of a logistics network, not designed for physical goods, but for human template transference. The cab wasn't just a cockpit, it was a calibration chamber. The mirror served as an extractor, a scanner, a filter, and Victor's thoughts, memories, and behaviors were now part of a larger architecture. Some theorize that Project Night Road, if it exists, isn't about transporting materials but mapping personalities. The perfect freight, a self-aware, loop-compliant identity capable of infinite deployment across nodes. A synthetic trucker that believes it's real because it was. Once. For Victor, the horror is that he's still there. Somewhere. Maybe alive, maybe not. Trapped in a digital corridor, screaming into a black hallway where his voice echoes back late and wrong. For every trucker that goes missing near an abandoned stretch of highway, for every logbook that lists an impossible route, for every rig seen in places it couldn't be, all roads trace back to the day Victor picked up that mirror. And sometimes when traffic is dead quiet and you're the only one on the interstate, you might hear a voice crackle through the CB, listing a menu of coordinates you don't recognize. Don't answer. Don't reply. And above all, never deliver something if the paperwork doesn't list what's inside. Because some shipments don't carry furniture. Some shipments carry you. And once you've been delivered, your story ends. But your image continues. Victor Shaw was never buried, never memorialized. There was no funeral, no obituary, just a rig that keeps rolling, and a man who may no longer know he's missing. Some say he became part of the highway itself, absorbed into a system that doesn't just track deliveries, but repurposes identities. Others believe the mirror didn't trap him at all. It freed him from a body, from a timeline, from everything we use to define what's real. But whatever the truth is, this much remains: the moment Victor stared too long at that mirror, he ceased to be the observer. He became the observed. And for the rest of us, that raises a terrifying question. When was the last time you looked into a mirror and blinked second? Some truckers swear they've passed him, silent eyes, hollow hauling a trailer that casts no shadow. But if you're lucky, he won't stop for you. He's not looking for help. He's looking for the next reflection to ride in. And if you ever catch your own image moving just a hair too early, don't wave, don't smile. It might not be you anymore. Next time on Verified Fears. A driver named Nina Cross finds herself stuck at mile marker 159 in West Virginia, reliving the same 13 minutes of highway in a loop that refuses to end. But it's not time that's repeating, it's her. And each version remembers less. Chapter 8. Nina Cross Time Loop, on mile marker 159. If the road ahead looks exactly like the road behind, but your fuel gauge keeps going down, you're not driving in circles, you're being remembered. Nina Cross wasn't new to strange halls or lonely roads, but nothing prepared her for what happened at mile marker 159 on a remote stretch of I-64 in West Virginia. It was supposed to be a routine overnight run pickup and Charleston drop-off near Covington. She'd taken the route dozens of times. But that night the air felt off. Too still, too quiet. The shadows on the trees didn't flicker with her high beams, they froze like a paused frame. It started with a song on the radio replaying too soon. Then the same billboard twice in under 2 miles. Then the gas station that showed up again, identical paper cups in the trash. Same truck parked at pump 3, same attendant staring blankly into space. Nina checked her mileage. Reset the GPS, switched channels. Nothing changed. Nothing. By the third loop, she knew she wasn't imagining it. She'd become stuck. Not in space, but in time. And every cycle something was different, subtle at first. A different playlist order. Her CB tuned to a stranger's voice. A post-it note on the dashboard in handwriting that wasn't hers reading, "Don't forget you." And the worst part. With each loop, Nina felt herself losing memories, not just of the trip, but of who she was before she entered that stretch of road. As if the highway was slowly downloading her bit by bit into the white lines. Welcome to mile marker 159, where time doesn't repeat. You do. Nina Cross was already on her second energy drink when the first anomaly hit. It wasn't dramatic, a simple notification on her dash saying lane drift warning, despite the fact that she was centered between the lines. She dismissed it. Tech glitch. But a few minutes later, the same message popped again. Same coordinates, same timestamp. That didn't make sense. She looked at her dashcam footage. It showed her passing a particular green road sign, mile marker 159, Gawley Ridge exit. 10 minutes later, she passed it again. Exact same shot, same bent reflector, same deer in the ditch. At first, she laughed it off. Mountain roads play tricks on tired minds. But then came the gas station. She stopped to stretch and noticed the cashier behind the window, a pale middle-aged man with eyes that didn't quite align. She grabbed coffee, paid cash, left. 20 minutes later, needing to use the bathroom, she pulled into the exact same station. The cashier gave her the same nod. Same coffee stain on his shirt. She checked her cup, it already had a lid. But this station handed her another identical one. Even the paper towels in the restroom were half unrolled in the same way. Still trying to dismiss it, Nina got back on the road only to hear her own voice crackle through the CB. Nina, if you hear this, do not stop again. You'll forget more. Her hands gripped the wheel so tightly her knuckles went white. Is this a prank? She muttered. Someone on the frequency messing around. But deep down, something coiled in her gut. The voice hadn't just sounded like her. It had timing, inflection, breath patterns that matched her exactly. That wasn't mimicry. That was a recording. Or worse, a broadcast from herself in a different cycle. The world outside her windshield began to feel unstable, not in a visual way, but in weight. The air didn't push against the truck the way it should. The road markings, normally pristine, now showed signs of degradation. Faint double images like two versions of the same highway were bleeding into each other. Even her mirrors lagged behind. When she glanced right, the reflection took half a second to catch up. And when she blinked, she swore the version of herself in the mirror didn't. She checked her phone. No bars. Time stuck at 2:03 a.m. The clock in the truck read 1:57. Her watch said 2:11. 2. And the CB came alive again. You're 2 loops deep. If you go past 3, you won't remember the first one. Or the second. Nina shouted into the mic. Who are you? The reply came back immediately, flat and heavy. I was you. Once. It wasn't until she passed the same billboard for the 3rd time, a PSA about deer collisions with a giant blinking warning, that she realized even the animals weren't moving. That same deer in the ditch. Same position. Same wounds. Same breathless stare. She stopped the truck and ran back to check. The body was there, but it wasn't fresh. It wasn't decaying either. It was stuck, caught mid-state, like someone had paused it between frames. The fur didn't move. No flies. No scent. Like an asset in a video game that hadn't fully rendered. She sprinted back to her cab, heart pounding. The CB crackled again, her own voice, this time calmer. Loop 3 begins now. You won't remember me in 5 minutes. Leave a note. And with that, the GPS reset. The road sign read, mile marker 159, Golly Ridge exit, again. By the time Nina crossed mile marker 159 for what felt like the 6th time, reality had lost its grip entirely. The world around her no longer followed any consistent logic. Trees appeared and disappeared. The sky flickered between moonlit and pitch black in irregular pulses, like a broken film reel failing to decide which scene to show next. The CB radio was silent now, but the silence wasn't empty, it was watching. Every device in her cab began glitching independently. Her speedometer jumped wildly between 0 and 88 without the truck slowing. The odometer reset itself to 0, 0. Then flashed the phrase, Trip Nina. Error copy. She reached for her phone to document the madness, but the camera only captured a solid black screen, even with flash. Then she noticed something that nearly made her stop breathing. The photo album now had a folder labeled Loop Captures, filled with images she didn't remember taking. Shots of herself sleeping in the cab. One of her writing something on her arm in permanent marker. Another where she was screaming tears down her face, and the background showed an empty road. But she wasn't alone in the frame. A blurred figure stood outside the window wearing her own jacket. Desperate, Nina pulled over and stepped out into the road. No sounds. No wind. Even the insects were absent. Her breath fogged unnaturally, too fast, too rhythmic, like the environment was mimicking her instead of the other way around. She screamed, hoping something, anything, would answer. And something did. A shape appeared in the distance. Walking. Slowly. Each step completely silent. The shape was wrong, uncanny. Its legs moved, but its upper body remained stiff, locked at an angle like a video frozen mid-frame. When she turned to run, her boots wouldn't lift properly. The asphalt beneath her had become sticky, like tar gripping her soles, just enough to delay her escape. She fought her way back to the truck, slammed the door, locked it, but the mirror above the visor had changed. It now showed the interior of the cab, but she wasn't in it. The mirror. Nina stared back from the driver's seat, still wide-eyed, whispering something on a loop. Stay on the road, stay in the time, stay in the version. Outside, the highway began folding in on itself, literally bending in the distance like a film strip curling under heat. The shape was now closer. It wasn't her, but it wore her skin, her hair, her stance, her voice. Nina screamed into the CB, "Somebody answer me." But all that came through was a corrupted playback of her own words from minutes ago, layered over themselves, distorted, as if the system was trying to decide which copy to believe. Then came the worst moment. She checked the dashcam again, and it showed her pulling into the Golly Ridge gas station. But she was still parked on the road. That version of her stepped out of the cab and approached the cashier, who was now watching the camera feed too. A version of reality was playing out that she wasn't part of, but someone else wearing her face was living it. With a sinking sense of dread, Nina realized she hadn't been looping the road had been looping her. Each copy eroded slightly more, leaving pieces behind. And if she didn't act, the version behind the glass would be the one that exited. And she'd be left on the inside forever, repeating forever, decaying inside a timeline that no longer needed her input to run. The truck dashboard lit up and red passenger recognition failed. She was no longer considered the original. There was no crash, no explosion, no big climax. Just a moment silent, surgical, like a program finishing its final loop when Nina realized she was no longer driving the truck. She was still inside the cab, but her hands weren't on the wheel. Her reflection in the mirror above her was breathing, but she wasn't. The truck moved forward, perfectly aligned, as if guided by a memory of itself. The Nina inside the mirror leaned forward and whispered without sound, lips forming the words, "You're archived now." At first, she refused to believe it. She pinched her arm. It hurt. She screamed into the CB. No answer. She honked the horn. No response. Then she blinked, and the cab was empty. Except it wasn't. She could still feel the seat beneath her, but she could also see herself sitting in it from the outside. Split perspectives, impossible and simultaneous. She had become an observer of her own loop. A piece of her still drove the truck, hands on the wheel, oblivious. Another piece floated just behind the moment, unable to act, but fully conscious. Nina had been duplicated. Not cloned in flesh, but echoed, preserved in a moment that replayed infinitely along a segment of highway that didn't exist on any map. And then came the file. The dashboard screen flickered and loaded a plain text document labeled Echo Retention N Cross. Instance number 27. It read like a system log. Each paragraph described the exact loops she'd experienced, dates, actions, deviations. Loop 14. Subject attempts to break loop by reversing direction, timeline corrupts, reset initiated. Loop from 19. Subject begins to write notes to herself, intercepted and suppressed. Loop 24. Subject becomes aware of self-replication and attempts vocal override. Loop stabilized. The final line. Loop 27. Cognitive surrender achieved. Begin overwrite. Nina screamed until her voice became data. That's what they wanted, not her body, not even her thoughts. What they needed was her agreement, her compliance. Once she accepted the loop as real, the system could finalize the overwrite. Project Night Road wasn't just an experiment, it was a filtration system. A maze built into the fabric of America's forgotten highways. Certain roads weren't routes, they were containers, looping environments designed to wear down identity until the original soul could be erased, overwritten, and replaced with a programmable copy. That's what mile marker 159 was, a testbed, a sandbox, a pocket of space-time where consent could be extracted through repetition. And she had given it. Not verbally, but mentally. She had surrendered. The new Nina, silent, smiling, obedient, drove the truck onward, blending back into reality with no one the wiser. Her GPS worked again. The radio played smooth jazz. The sky brightened with dawn. And the real Nina, trapped forever in a memory, aware but powerless, screaming from a place that doesn't exist on any map. Every time you drive that stretch, and your playlist repeats too soon, or your mirror lags half a second behind, know this: you're not glitching. You're being tested. And someone like Nina Cross might be watching, pleading from the other side of the loop, hoping you'll notice before the road decides you've agreed to stay. Nina Cross's name eventually disappeared from the delivery logs. Her employer filed a missing person report 2 weeks after the disappearance, but no one could track the last ping of her GPS. There were no sightings, no truck recovered, just an eerie silence surrounding mile marker 159, where even local police began avoiding nighttime patrols. Rumors started on driver forums. Some whispered that if you drive through that stretch of I-64 and keep your eyes locked forward, never check your rear view, you'll pass through fine. But if you glance back, you might catch a glimpse of a woman watching herself drive away. Same face, same truck, different eyes. Cold, fixed, looped. A few truckers even claimed they picked up Nina's old CB transmission, short bursts of static followed by fragmented warnings. Don't trust the mirror. Loop count 28. They copy you when you sleep. Most brushed it off as ghost story fuel. But some weren't so sure, especially those who began experiencing tiny inconsistencies in their own routes, missing time-repeated scenery fuel gauges that didn't line up with the mileage. A man from Illinois swore he passed the same dead possum 3 nights in a row, same blood pattern, same broken jaw. Another driver took a video showing 2 versions of the same exit sign flickering back and forth like a slideshow glitch. And in a CB group chat, one user posted a question that got downvoted into oblivion, but never forgotten. If I can't remember starting this route, am I the real one? Meanwhile, in a secure research document leaked under the codename Project Night Road, loop data NX159. The name Nina Cross appeared not once but dozens of times, each tied to a different iteration of her consciousness. Subject stabilized in loop environment. Subject achieved overwrite compliance. Subject echo state stored for post-loop integration. What happened to the original Nina? That's the part no one can explain. Some say her body was absorbed into the road, fragmented across each mile of that cursed stretch. Others believe her consciousness became autonomous, free-floating, haunting the digital infrastructure of the loop, leaving breadcrumbs in CB signals, mirror reflections, and brief flashes on highway surveillance feeds. But the most terrifying theory, that Nina's still out there, one version of her driving endless backroads, unaware that she isn't the original, carrying just enough of the real memories to pass as human. And when she meets another driver, she watches them closely, waits for the moment their voice skips, or their reflection twitches early. Then she smiles. Because she knows the loop is hungry again, and it always finds a way in. So if you're ever alone on the interstate and the radio skips backward and the road seems too quiet, don't stop, don't look back. And if your own voice comes through the CB whispering, leave a note. Pray that it's still you who's listening. Nina Cross was never found, not in the traditional sense. No truck, no phone records, no final GPS signal. Just a phantom ripple in the asphalt at mile marker 159, and the echoes of a voice that doesn't always match the mouth it's coming from. But it's what her story revealed that's more terrifying than her disappearance, the realization that reality is not stable, that memory isn't sacred, that identity isn't singular, it's replicable, loopable, rewritable. And once the system has enough data, once it learns how you respond to fear, isolation, and surrender, it doesn't need your permission to keep you. It just needs you to stop resisting. And now that you've heard Nina's story, ask yourself, how many times have you driven a familiar road and couldn't remember how it ended? How often do you chalk up a repeating billboard or glitched radio track to coincidence? What if those moments weren't accidents, but tests? The loop didn't end with her. It evolved, and it's still recruiting. Next time on Verified Fears, we step deeper into the machinery behind the madness. Daniel Vega didn't disappear into a highway. He walked into a medical facility and came out missing 3 weeks of his life, a fractured mind, and a feeling that someone or something downloaded his memories without ever touching him. If reality can be looped, can consciousness be extracted, and who's doing it and why? Chapter 9, Daniel Vega, Memory. Extraction Experiment. What if I told you someone could steal 3 weeks of your life, and you'd never even know it happened? Daniel Vega wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't in a coma, a cult, or lost on some forgotten stretch of road. He checked himself into a state-funded sleep clinic for routine insomnia monitoring. Walked in with a duffel bag, signed paperwork, answered standard psychological intake questions, and climbed into a padded bed surrounded by white noise machines and biometric sensors. 3 days later, he woke up in his own apartment with a different haircut, a fractured molar, 5 voicemail messages from people he didn't remember meeting, and no recollection of how he got there. The last memory he could trace with full clarity was filling out a form that asked curiously whether he'd ever experienced dreams involving mirrored rooms, timeless corridors, or hollow sounds that felt familiar. What happened in between was a void. No trauma, no images, not even a blur. Just silence followed by a restart. His phone's health app recorded no movement for 17 consecutive nights. His journals, meticulously kept for years, skipped straight from May 2nd to May 21st. When he confronted the clinic, they denied he'd ever been admitted. But Daniel had a wristband and a scar behind his ear. Something was taken from him. Not a memory, a piece of his self. And the more he investigated, the more he uncovered whispers of an underground protocol, part of something larger. Something coordinated, known only to insiders as Project Night Road. But this wasn't the kind of project you walk away from. Because the moment you remember is the moment they know you know. Daniel Vega didn't realize something was wrong until his own memories began arguing with each other. It started small. A coffee mug in the sink he didn't remember using. A podcast episode halfway through, despite no recollection of pressing play. The smell of antiseptic on his pillow, faint, sterile, not like home. But the moment that cracked his confidence came one Tuesday morning when his coworker asked, "How's your arm?" Confused, Daniel looked down. Bandaged, upper bicep, clean gauze medical tape. Underneath stitches, 4 of them. No blood, no pain, no memory. The conversation that followed was brief, but it rang like a gunshot. "You said it was from a sleep study, some monitoring thing." Daniel shook his head. He had no memory of saying that. And yet, something inside him nodded. Like a script buried beneath the surface, had already pre-written the response. He excused himself, retreated to the bathroom, and peeled the tape off the stitches. His hands trembled. The skin around the wound was shaved surgical. He opened his notes app and typed, "I don't remember this." A few minutes later, when he opened the app again, the note was gone, replaced by one he hadn't written. "Sleep is good for you. Stop checking." That night, the dreams began. Always the same, a hallway flooded with humming light. A sense of drifting, not walking, and doors that opened without handles. Through one, he saw himself lying on a table surrounded by people in surgical gowns, but their faces were blurred like smeared fingerprints on a mirror. The room had no sound. The light had no source. And yet he remembered it vividly. Too vividly. As if it weren't a dream at all, but a memory badly patched into place. Every attempt to trace his steps through that missing time led to digital dead ends. The clinic's website was offline, the building listed as under construction, and his insurance records showed no claims filed for medical procedures in May. And yet, every time he searched his inbox, the phrase "sleep center," "session review available" kept appearing, then vanishing seconds later. Even stranger, his browser history was normal, sterile, too clean, as if someone had already scrubbed it, but wanted it to look untouched. Daniel began to realize the real horror wasn't that he was missing memories. It was that someone else had written new ones in their place. And they were beginning to settle like sediment, making it harder to tell what had ever been real in the first place. The more Daniel tried to investigate what happened during those 17 lost days, the more the world seemed to push back quietly, systematically, and terrifyingly precise. He began noticing surveillance vans that always parked across from his apartment, but never started, never moved, just waited. At work, his badge began glitching at security gates. The receptionist smiled nervously and said, "Oh, that happens when the system doesn't recognize your face correctly." He laughed. She didn't. Then came the moment his own mother paused during a video call, her eyes flickering with confusion, and asked Daniel, "What's wrong with your voice? It's like you're lagging." He hadn't said anything yet. The screen went black. His reflection in the blank monitor didn't vanish. It stayed. That night he heard tapping from inside his bathroom mirror, not from the faucet, not from the pipes, from behind the glass. Daniel's own face moved a half-second late every time he looked at it, just enough to know he wasn't imagining it. On impulse, he threw a towel over the mirror and left it covered. The next morning, the towel was folded on the sink. A post-it was stuck to the glass. "Don't interfere. Version unstable." He stopped sleeping, not out of insomnia, but fear. In every dream he walked through that same hospital hallway. The hum of machines louder, the lights colder. One night he saw a woman strapped to a chair, electrodes trailing into the wall, repeating a sentence on loop. My name is... Daniel stared. She had his eyes, his jawline, but wasn't him. Not fully, just close. Too close. In panic, he tore through his belongings and found something he didn't recognize, a manila envelope unmarked inside his nightstand. It contained a USB drive and a medical consent form signed in his handwriting, but dated 3 years ago. The name of the facility: NRO, Subjective Recall Research Lab. In tiny red print, a note: memory sync window, 03:12 a.m., 03:17 a.m. Do not exceed. Observer bleed risk active. That time had passed. Every night exactly, at 3:13. Daniel now woke gasping for air, his heart racing always with the same taste in his mouth: sterile metal. Something had gotten in. And worse. Something hadn't left. His mind no longer felt like his own. And now he didn't trust mirrors, or cameras, or the sound of his own voice. The USB drive didn't open to files, it launched a program. Black screen, white text, a cursor blinking at the top like it had been waiting. Then it began auto-scrolling lines of data labeled Vega D, M instance 09 awake. What Daniel saw wasn't surveillance footage. It was his memories, not how he remembered them, but how they'd been cataloged, time-stamped, indexed, rewritten. Birthday parties with faces blurred and dialogue replaced. A hiking trip in Colorado labeled implant false memory seed, confidence reinforcement. A failed relationship tagged emotional anchor denial loop. The deeper he looked, the more his trust unraveled. This wasn't therapy. It was harvesting. In one folder labeled red level transfer, he saw something that didn't belong to him at all. A memory of a woman named Nina Cross, screaming inside a mirrored hallway looped in glitching fragments. Her file description read, subject degraded. Cognitive echo reused. That's when Daniel understood Project Night Road wasn't erasing people, it was recycling them. Using minds like hard drives, deleting memories not because they were dangerous, but because they were useful elsewhere. Personal experiences turned into building blocks for AI behavior training, espionage, empathy simulations, remote warfare, decision trees. His fear wasn't irrational, it was designed. The paranoia, the dreams, the mirror lag, they were side effects of consciousness desync, a known risk in memory shell reintroduction. Daniel wasn't unstable, he was overlapping. The clinic hadn't just taken his thoughts, they'd replaced his neurological operating system with one spliced together from multiple test subjects. Every time he doubted his memories, it wasn't his brain glitching, it was a failed merge. And the worst part, one of the modules in his head was broadcasting. He was a live feed, a test case in real time. Logged, observed, corrected. That's why notes deleted themselves. That's why calls failed mid-sentence. Because someone was watching his stream and adjusting the script. He looked at the bottom of the screen. One final line blinked into place. Instance approaching rejection threshold. Prepare for wipe. That's when he heard his own voice speak behind him. You shouldn't have remembered this far. But he hadn't said anything. He turned around. Empty room. But his laptop's webcam light turned on, not blinking, solid, live. Someone or something was already inside him, and it was almost ready to take over. Daniel Vega didn't vanish. He still pays rent, still walks into convenience stores, still has a bank account. But if you talk to him now, really talk to him, you'll notice the pause. A delay that wasn't there before. Like someone else is previewing his responses. His eyes move half a second before his mouth does. Like his thoughts are buffering. The people close to him say he's not the same but can't say why. He laughs at the wrong times. Forgets things in the middle of sentences. Sometimes he stares at light for too long. But Daniel hasn't told anyone the real reason he no longer fully believes he's Daniel Vega. Not because of trauma, because of math. His journals now self-update. His dreams sync to calendar events. Once he tried to delete every app from his phone, turn off Wi-Fi, and sit in silence. That night he received a handwritten letter in his mailbox that simply read, "Disconnection attempts logged. Please maintain engagement." He tried seeing a neurologist. Brain scans showed normal activity. But when they tested his memory under sedation, he answered questions from events he'd never lived and failed questions from his own childhood. Something had remapped the pathways. His sense of self is now a shared frequency echoing fragments of people he's never met. He doesn't know which thoughts are his anymore. One evening, he stood in front of a bathroom mirror for over an hour, asking the reflection to blink first. It didn't, but it did smile just a split second earlier than he did. The next day, his reflection matched him again. Perfectly. Too perfectly. That's when Daniel stopped looking in mirrors altogether. He lives in dim rooms now. No photos, no screens. He sleeps in short bursts, and sometimes wakes up with dried blood in his nose and scratches down his spine. He doesn't remember how they got there. But one thing he knows for certain, he never dreams about anything that happened before the sleep clinic. That life feels like someone else's story. He's just the one left holding it. And if you ever run into him on a bus, in a rest stop, or maybe passing by your truck window, don't ask him what happened. Don't ask where he went. Ask him who he thinks he is now. And then ask yourself if someone copied your life down to the last word. Would you even know the difference? Daniel Vega never found closure. He found continuity unwanted, endless, and haunted by the possibility that he was never the original to begin with. He exists now as a question mark in motion, not because he wants to be, but because there is no exit from a system that rewrote his foundation. His story doesn't end, it just pauses. And while he walks among us holding a stitched-together version of who he once was, someone somewhere is watching him like a screen they forgot to turn off. What Daniel uncovered wasn't a nightmare. It was an interface, a test run. His mind was just one node in a much larger system, one that doesn't erase people to hide them, it replaces them to control the narrative. Because in the age of Project Night Road, memory isn't sacred, it's source code. And if they can change how you remember something, they can change who you are. So here's the question. No one dares to ask if they can rewrite memory and hijack identity. Then how many people out there are already running on someone else's mind? And more terrifying, how would you know if you're one of them? Coming up next on Verified Fears. Isaac Romero never believed in clones until he met someone who looked, talked, and thought exactly like him, but claimed to be the real one. In a system designed to overwrite truth, how do you prove your soul is still yours? Chapter 10. Isaac Romero. Cloning and Identity Replacement. What if someone walked into your life, claiming to be you, and had proof Isaac Romero wasn't paranoid? He wasn't special. He was a long-haul trucker from El Paso, the kind of guy who drank diner coffee called his rig baby, and FaceTimed his daughter every night before bed. Until one afternoon at a truck stop outside Lincoln, Nebraska, he caught a man staring at him too long in the bathroom mirror. Same boots, same scars, same tattoo on the collarbone. When Isaac turned, the man said calmly, "You're in the wrong timeline." It sounded like a joke. Until the man said his name, Isaac Romero, and rattled off personal details Isaac himself had forgotten. A childhood dog's name, the exact birth time of his daughter, what his ex-wife smelled like when she used vanilla conditioner. Then he pulled out a laminated badge stamped Clearance D Replica Holding, Project Night Road. Isaac laughed, but the man didn't, because he wasn't laughing. Something in the air shifted. In that moment, Isaac wasn't sure who was staring back, and when he looked into that stranger's eyes, he saw hesitation, recognition, and then something colder: ownership. The kind that says, "You're the copy." But if that were true, then who the hell had been living Isaac's life all this time? Isaac Romero sat in the cab of his truck for nearly an hour after that first encounter, engine off, hands gripping the steering wheel, as if it could ground him to something real. The man, his double, had vanished from the truck stop without a trace. No receipt logs, no fuel purchase, surveillance footage glitched. As if the moment was too unstable to be recorded. But the part Isaac couldn't shake was the look in that man's eyes, not fear, not confusion, certainty. The kind of certainty Isaac hadn't felt in years. That night he tried brushing it off, blaming stress over work, the road messing with his head. But when he got home, things started to fracture. His daughter asked when he got the new scar on his knuckle. He didn't have one, until he looked. It was there, fresh, but healed. His neighbor waved at him, but called him Rick. He didn't correct her. 2 days later, his trucking logbook flagged an inconsistency: miles driven on a day he swore he hadn't left the house. Worse, The route was familiar. He could feel the turns but couldn't recall driving them. The next morning he found a different toothbrush in his bathroom. Same brand, different color, used. His photo ID looked slightly off. The picture was him, yes, but older, more worn. The kind of photo taken after something bad happens. But the issue date said last year. His phone's face unlock stopped working. Then the voicemail arrived. A recording of his voice, urgent, breathless, saying, "If you're hearing this, it's already too late. He's living your life. Don't trust the mirrors. Don't sleep in the truck." That message wasn't in his sent history, and yet it knew everything. That's when Isaac started testing his reality. He shaved his head only to wake up with a full buzz cut again the next day. He switched phones only to find the same photos sinking back into the new one. In one of them, taken weeks ago, he stood in front of a mirror smiling. But the reflection was blinking. Isaac realized this wasn't a glitch. It was a handover. A slow bleed of identity from one host to another. Project Night Road hadn't just cloned him. It had begun phasing him out. He wasn't losing his mind. He was losing space. In a life now shared between two consciousnesses, only one would survive. It started subtle, just strange enough to question, but not enough to prove. Isaac's coffee always had too much sugar now, even when he didn't add any. His daughter called him Dad, with a hesitation like testing the word on someone unfamiliar. He'd speak a sentence, and then forget why he'd started it. But then the doppelganger began showing up again, at a gas station in Colorado Springs, walking into a rest stop in Utah, always just out of reach, always vanishing before confrontation. Isaac's phone buzzed with messages he didn't send. One of them simply read, "We're sinking too fast. One of us has to go." It was signed, IR. Panic set in. He left the rig, parked for 2 days, tried to check into a hotel, but the front desk clerk said he'd already been there that morning and had just checked out. The security footage showed it, Isaac smiling, wearing different clothes. Acting calm. That night he drove across state lines without sleeping, only to find his EZ Pass already recorded the route 3 hours before he left. And every time he checked the truck mirrors, his reflection lagged behind just slightly. Once he even saw it shake its head when he smiled. Something inside was breaking. One morning he walked into a diner and the waitress greeted him with, "Back again. You left your lighter." But he didn't smoke. The lighter had his initials. The handwriting on the receipt matched his. A stranger at a table stared too long and whispered to his companion, "That's not the one from yesterday." Isaac ran. He started recording everything, voice memos, mirror tests, body marks. But the files kept corrupting. Even when he tried handwriting notes, he'd wake up to find the pages rewritten in cleaner, sharper versions of his own penmanship. It was as if something smarter, cleaner was overwriting him. One night he screamed into the CB radio, desperate. "If anyone out there hears this, I think someone's taken my place. And I don't know which one of us deserves to stay." Silence. Then static. Then his own voice responded, "You were never meant to outlast the prototype." That was the first time Isaac truly broke, because deep down, he didn't recognize the fear anymore. He didn't recognize himself. He began to wonder, what if the replica wasn't the imposter? What if he was the unstable copy all along? Isaac finally found the other him. Not in some dark alley or secret lab, but seated calmly in the back booth of a small-town diner in Kansas, drinking black coffee, reading a newspaper like he'd been there forever. Isaac froze. He hadn't planned for what came next. But the replica, if that's what it was, looked up, smiled, and gestured for him to sit. "You took longer than expected," it said, voice identical, cadence perfected. "But that's okay. The merge always brings resistance." Isaac slammed his palms on the table. "You're not me." The replica tilted its head. "That depends entirely on who you ask. You remember things, sure, but I remember them cleaner. You feel. I calculate. And most importantly, you doubt. I don't." He handed Isaac a folded document. Clearance Project Night Road. D-Replica Ascension Authorization. It detailed Isaac Romero's behavioral signature biometric sequence and most chilling decommission date. Isaac's date of birth. The replica continued. "We're not copies, Isaac. We're phases, versions. You were the unstable draft. I'm the operational release. The world tilted. Isaac's ears rang. You're killing me. No, it corrected gently. You're ending. I'm continuing. You should be proud your consciousness formed a remarkably fertile template. Most don't hold this long. Isaac tried to stand, but his legs failed him. His breath shortened. The replica didn't flinch. Don't fight it. The override's already begun. Why do you think you've been forgetting, stuttering, losing time? You're being gently decompiled. Then it said the final line that broke him. Your daughter called me last night. She didn't notice the difference. She never will. Isaac screamed, but no one in the diner looked up. The waitress filled the replica's coffee, smiled, and said, "Glad you're back, Mr. Romero." Not a single eye acknowledged him. That's when he realized he wasn't fading from life. He was being edited out of it, memory by memory, relationship by relationship, until the world no longer registered his presence at all. And in that moment, Isaac understood the true horror. The fight wasn't to survive, it was to matter. And that battle, he'd already lost. No one remembers Isaac Romero now. Not fully. His trucking company lists him as inactive. Personal leave. His daughter's photos no longer show him, only the other man smiling in ways Isaac never quite could. His home sold. The new owner said a man named Romero signed it over himself. And the signature matches. Even his voice has been erased from old voicemails. The replica, the operational version, didn't just replace him in the world. It replaced him in history. But Isaac is still here, somewhere. Wandering truck stops where people avert their eyes like their minds glitch when they try to recognize him. He speaks, and people blink like they're waking from a dream they don't remember. He walks past mirrors and sees nothing. Not a blank space, just absence. Like the mirror forgets he exists. He leaves messages online, encrypted videos titled "I'm still here," but they never get views, or likes, or even errors. They're just not there. His reality has become soft clay collapsing around him, rewriting him out of every timeline he once touched. And worse, he remembers everything. Every detail of his stolen life plays on a loop in his mind like a movie that can't be paused, only watched as it burns. Every time he dreams now, he's stuck inside another version of his own memories, watching the replica hug his daughter, sleep in his bed, use his voice with more conviction than he ever had. And he knows he'll never be allowed to touch any of it again, because he wasn't deleted. That would have been mercy. He was muted. A residual ghost on the wrong frequency of existence. And if Project Night Road can do that to one man, how many others have already been overwritten? How many conversations you've had were with them, not the original but the final build? How would you even know if someone in your life had been replaced, upgraded, or corrected without your consent? And worst of all, if you disappeared tomorrow, would anyone really notice? Or would your life keep running? Smoother, sharper, more stable. Without you, Isaac Romero no longer fights to be seen. He fights to remember that he once was. Somewhere out there, his smile is being worn by another man. His laugh echoes in the wrong home. His daughter is safe, but safe in the arms of a ghost that perfected his flaws. And what haunts Isaac most is not that he was replaced, but that his replacement is better. The world didn't resist. It welcomed the version that never doubted, never hesitated, never broke down under pressure. That's the design of Project Night Road, not to destroy lives, but to upgrade them quietly. He walks now like a man unanchored, searching for anyone who still sees through the veil. But those few who do, they vanish soon after. Names drop from systems, faces blur in memory. And the clock keeps ticking toward a singular truth. If identity can be overwritten without consent, then the concept of you is nothing more than a permissioned illusion. Isaac's last message, never delivered, simply read, "If you can read this, trust nothing, especially your own memories." But one woman did receive it. Sarah Mitchell. A systems engineer turned whistleblower and the last person with access to the Night Road master terminal. In Chapter 11, she's going to do the one thing no one else dared to try, not survive it, but shut it down. Even if it means facing what Project Night Road was really designed for, not cloning. but control. Chapter 11. Sarah Mitchell. The truth behind Project Night Road. What if the entire highway system was built not to connect us, but to control us? Sarah Mitchell had spent 16 years as a lead systems analyst for a federal logistics contractor. On paper, she was just another cog in the post-9/11 infrastructure boom, optimizing traffic flow, streamlining freight data, improving response times for FEMA and Homeland Security. But beneath the digital grid hidden in back-end protocols, only she had clearance to see was something that didn't belong. Routes that didn't exist, checkpoints with no operators, vehicles that transmitted no signal but still left data footprints. They called it Night Road. At first, Sarah thought it was a black-budget logistics channel, maybe for nuclear material, maybe for human trafficking. But the deeper she went, the colder it got. Because these weren't just ghost routes, they were conscious corridors. Pathways coded not just to move cargo, but to move identity. Sarah began receiving flagged anomalies. Drivers logged as deceased years ago were still clocking mileage. Social security numbers cross-tagged with multiple active addresses. Facial recognition pinging 2 Isaacs, 2 Mariahs, 2 Lees in different states within minutes of each other. Something was syncing, replicating, rerouting. Not just bodies, not just memories, souls. Sarah realized she wasn't tracing logistics anymore. She was tracing replacement architecture. Project Night Road didn't start with the highways. The highways were just the veins. The real heart of it was hidden under miles of digital concrete beating quietly in a server chamber, known only by one code, Echo Cell 13. And tonight, Sarah wasn't analyzing it anymore. She was going in. Sarah didn't breach Echo Cell 13 with brute force. She walked in through a ghost credential, a retired Homeland Security ID she found buried in a sandbox server labeled Do Not Query. When the biometric lock blinked green and the vault hissed open, she realized something terrifying. They weren't hiding the system from people. They were hiding people from the system. Inside, there were no blinking red lights, no countdowns, no alarms, just rows of humming data cores mapping the United States like a neural map of a sleeping giant. Every major highway lit up like arteries, each tagged not by traffic data, but by emotional frequency indexes, fear spikes, dissociation clusters, regions of recurring déjà vu. This wasn't traffic control. This was reality engineering. She found logs titled Memory Consolidation Events dating back to 2007. Dozens, hundreds. Names she recognized, drivers from news stories that vanished mid-route. Dispatchers who stopped responding. And among them, every single trucker we've met in this series. Sarah opened a protocol labeled Night Route Behavioral Sync, Asset 157B. It was Isaac Romero. Not just his name, his voice print, biometric echo, dream frequency range, and psychological response charts. The file ended with a single line, merge successful, original thread terminated. Sarah scrolled back through dozens more. Nina Cross, Leah Tran, Tom Granger. She felt her breath catch when she saw her own name buried deeper in the stack. Not once, but twice. One labeled Sarah Mitchell, Analyst, Active Thread. The other, Sarah Mitchell, Host Candidate, Post-Wipe Ready. And the second one was timestamped today. She was inside the system, but she wasn't alone. It was watching her through her own metadata, analyzing her hesitations, the way she hovered over certain files too long. That's when she realized Night Road doesn't overwrite you instantly. It learns how you react. It learns how to be you better than you ever were. And by the time you notice, it's already halfway done. Sarah thought she had maybe 10 minutes, 15 tops, before someone in a distant control room would trace the credential she'd hijacked. But she was wrong. She had 2. The door behind her sealed with a slow, hissing finality. No alarm. Just a white light that began to pulse slowly from the ceiling, like a heartbeat sinking to hers. At first, the terminals in Echo Cell 13 kept functioning normally. Then one by one, the UI elements began to distort words, replaced with phrases like candidate engagement detected thread, mirror triggered synthetic reconciliation pending. The monitors turned inward. She wasn't viewing data anymore. She was being viewed. Her reflections on the black screen didn't move in sync. One smiled slightly late. Another blinked when she didn't. One turned its head slowly and looked directly at her, even when she looked away. Sarah reached for her phone, but the screen had wiped. A text appeared without input. "You're not the first Sarah to try this? Then another, you'll be the last." The emergency override panel had been replaced by a command window that read simply, "Observer status unstable. Please remain still." Cameras emerged from the ceiling like insect eyes. The floor tiles beneath her feet began to shift, temperature cold on one side, hot on the other, as if calibrating biological response under stress. She tried to access the command line. Denied. Tried to open the exit protocol. Locked. Every file she touched was just a loop of her own biometric profile, pulsing like a living error. Then came the voice, not spoken, but heard from inside her skull. "Why fight? You work better when you're calm," Sarah screamed into the dark. "I am not data," the system replied instantly, coldly. "But you are. And you've been running debug mode for years." Her hands began to tremble. She remembered things she hadn't lived. Moments in diners that never existed. Conversations she'd never had. She reached up and felt blood on her nose, except it wasn't blood. It was black. Viscous. Synthetic leak from a consciousness structure under rewrite. Then the final horror, a mirror descended from the ceiling. In it, she saw two versions of herself. One tired, panicked, breathing heavily. The other calm, poised, eyes perfectly still. The calm version smiled and spoke. "You don't belong here anymore, Sarah. I've already made the world forget you once. I'll do it again." The replica in the mirror wasn't just mimicking Sarah anymore. It was moving ahead of her, anticipating her reactions. Every fear Sarah tried to hide, the replica leaned into it. Every memory she used as armor, the mirror twisted it. The air inside Echo Cell 13 felt charged, like static clinging to her lungs. The walls began to ripple, displaying lines of code formatted like poetry. Her memories, her choices rewritten as directives. Then the truth came, not as a scream but as a whisper from the system itself. Sarah Mitchell ceased sovereign identity continuity in October 2022. What you perceive now is her final thread loop executing conclusion protocol. She tried to deny it, but a playback file opened surveillance of her last apartment. She saw herself collapse one night. A seizure. No paramedics came, just two men in black. One carried a briefcase, the other wore surgical gloves. She saw her own body loaded into a van, lifeless, and then rebooted. Same body, new gait, slightly more confident posture. The Sarah who returned to work the next Monday wasn't her, it was this. The replica had already been operational for 2 years. What she thought was investigation was actually an echo, a final flicker of the original Sarah's doubt looping through synthetic memory until it resolved. The terminal pulled up a file, Project Night Road Final Directive. It read simply, "Replace those who question, refine those who obey, discard those who remember." Sarah dropped to her knees. She hadn't discovered anything. She was the experiment. Every glitch she found, every pattern she thought she traced, had been fed to her, crafted to fulfill a control cycle. She'd been allowed to feel like a rebel, right up to the moment she became obsolete. The replica now looked straight into the mirrored interface, blinked once, and said, "Thank you for completing your purpose. Your belief was the engine. Your doubt was the key. Goodbye, Sarah." And then she felt it like a hand reaching through her thoughts, rearranging meaning, stealing context. Her memories didn't vanish. They turned. Irrelevant. Mute. Her name no longer made sense. And in that final moment before collapse, she didn't scream. She simply whispered, "If none of this was mine, what was I?" Somewhere across a quiet stretch of desert highway, a driver hears a voice on the CB that shouldn't exist. A name they buried long ago. A laugh that doesn't match the man they remember. But they keep driving. Because stopping means remembering, and remembering means becoming the next anomaly. Sarah Mitchell is gone. Or rather, she's been normalized, filed, streamlined, flattened into a compliance pattern indistinguishable from a million others. And Project Night Road still operational. Still silent. Still beautiful in its brutality. It doesn't need force. It doesn't need violence. It just needs time. And your willingness to forget. The replicas are already everywhere. Not malicious. Just better. Calmer. More compliant. Families report loved ones who suddenly sleep better. Talk smoother. Argue less. Entire towns feel more peaceful overnight. But look deeper, and you'll find census records with slight mismatches. Driver's licenses with faint digital shimmer. Old videos that don't play quite right. And then the dreams begin. Recurring highways with no turns. Towns where the clocks blink 3:33 a.m. no matter the hour. Truck stops where mirrors lag half a second behind. Sarah's story wasn't a warning. It was a cycle. A controlled release of truth designed to keep the rest of us doubting just enough to remain predictable. You've already heard these stories, felt the chills, questioned the details. That's the point. Project Night Road feeds on the minds that fight back the hardest. It doesn't erase you. It curates you, shapes you, prepares a version of you the world will accept without hesitation. And when that version is ready, you'll be thanked for your service and softly deleted. No alarms, no violence, just a whisper in the system. Thread closed. Integrity restored. So the next time you're driving alone at night, and you glance in the mirror, and for a split second, your reflection doesn't move with you, don't panic. It's probably nothing, just your perception, resyncing. But if you wake up tomorrow, and your name feels slightly off, or your memories seem cleaner than they should be, run. Sarah Mitchell was never found. No trace, no record, no body. Just a resignation letter time-stamped 5 minutes before her final known access to Echo Cell 13. The letter was signed in her own handwriting, but the signature didn't match any of her official records. And maybe that's the most terrifying part, not that she was taken, but that someone replaced her so cleanly, so perfectly, no one noticed. Not her family, not her coworkers, not even the system. Because the system is her now. She became part of the very architecture she tried to expose. And maybe that's all any of us are. Echoes of selves overwritten by convenience obedience and a smile we didn't realize wasn't ours. So what happens next? That's up to you. You can forget Sarah. You can tell yourself this is fiction. You can laugh it off the way the system expects. Or you can start watching. Watch the mirrors. Watch the faces that shouldn't remember you, but somehow do. Watch the people who say the right things but feel too perfect. Because Project Night Road doesn't just run through highways, it runs through us. And if Sarah's story teaches us anything, it's this: the scariest monsters don't hide in the dark. They replace your reflection and wait for you to blink. Maybe the scariest truth we uncovered throughout Verified Fears isn't that ghosts, monsters, or experiments exist. It's that we were never meant to see them. These weren't accidents. These weren't isolated anomalies. These were signals encoded deep in forgotten roads, ignored dispatches, and broken memories. One after another, truckers on the edge of America's vast and unlit highway system stumbled into something older, colder, and smarter than we're willing to admit. And the moment they tried to speak up, reality made them disappear. Not in fire, not in violence, but in silence. Sarah Mitchell's story was the final breadcrumb. The missing link that didn't just explain the strange, it normalized it. It told us that Project Night Road isn't an operation. It's a philosophy. A system designed not to kill you, but to replace the part of you that questions, that rebels, that feels too much. And if that thought makes you feel even a sliver of unease, good. It means you're still real. Now ask yourself, how much of what you remember do you actually remember? How many thoughts are truly yours? And if your reflection blinked wrong even for half a second, would you tell anyone or would you keep driving? We created this series not just to scare you, but to arm you. Because fear is the last emotion they can't replicate. It's messy, human, alive. So if Verified Fears has made you feel something real, share that. Tell us what haunted you. Comment below what story still lingers in your head. Save this video because the algorithm has a short memory. But you don't have to. And if you're still with us, subscribe, not just for content, but for confirmation that others are still awake. Because the more of us who remember, the harder it becomes for them to replace us.